Dr. Wilson froze mid-examination, her gloved hand suspended above Martha Sullivan's exposed back. What had begun as a routine skin check had transformed into something from a nightmare. "Oh my God, they're moving," she whispered, her professional composure cracking like thin ice. The attending nurse dropped her clipboard with a clatter, backing against the wall as her face drained of color. "Get Dr. Chambers in here now!" Another staff member screamed from the doorway, attracting a flurry of white coats down the sterile corridor. Martha, 70, remained perfectly still on the examination table, her arthritic fingers clutching the paper sheet. Just yesterday, she had been planting marigolds and arguing with her insurance company about simple bedbug bites. "Mrs. Sullivan," Dr. Wilson's voice trembled. "Don't move. Whatever's beneath your skin, it's alive, and it's spreading." What was living inside this elderly woman's body? And why had everyone missed it until it was almost too late? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Martha Sullivan had not always been invisible. For 45 years, she had been the one people noticed first when entering a hospital room. Steady hands, calm voice, and the quiet authority that came from saving countless lives. At 70, her once auburn hair had faded to silver, but her posture remained military straight, a remnant of her years as a frontline nurse during the Vietnam War. Her small apartment at Evergreen Senior Living in Millfield, Connecticut, was a testament to a life well lived. Photographs lined the mantel. Martha in her crisp white uniform, her late husband Robert in his army dress blues, their son Michael graduating college before the car accident took him 15 years ago. The walls held commendations and thank you letters from patients whose lives she had touched. A shadow box displayed Robert's medals next to her nursing pins, their shared dedication to service. Every morning followed the same routine: coffee with 1 sugar, the doctor had insisted on reducing it from 2, the crossword puzzle from the local paper, and Liberty, her elderly tabby cat, curled on her lap. The aging feline had been Robert's last gift before cancer claimed him, a companion to ensure Martha wouldn't be entirely alone. "Just you and me against the world, old girl," Martha would say, scratching behind Liberty's ears. The cat's purr was often the only sound in the apartment aside from the ticking grandfather clock that had been in Robert's family for generations. What neighbors saw was a polite, somewhat reserved widow who kept her apartment immaculate and occasionally brought homemade banana bread to community gatherings. What they didn't see was Martha at night, sitting at her kitchen table counting out pills from various bottles, calculating which medications she could afford that month. They didn't see her open the bottom drawer of her dresser where a faded travel brochure for Paris lay atop an envelope marked Robert's Promise, containing $12,347 saved in small bills over decades, their dream trip that never happened. "Next year," she'd whisper to Robert's photograph, the same promise she'd made for 7 years since his passing. The rash had started innocuously enough, a small patch of redness on her shoulder blade that Martha had attributed to a new laundry detergent. But unlike typical irritations, it hadn't responded to hydrocortisone cream. Instead, it had spread across her back in an angry constellation, bringing with it an itch so profound it woke her from sleep, her nightgown damp with sweat. "Probably just stress," she told Liberty, unwilling to burden anyone or deplete her Paris fund for what was surely nothing serious. After all, she had treated thousands of rashes in her career. Martha Sullivan had seen the worst of human suffering in field hospitals. A simple skin irritation was hardly worth mentioning. She couldn't have known then that the tiny red bumps were just the beginning of a nightmare that would strip away her dignity, savings, and nearly her life, or that they would expose the cracks in a system she had faithfully served for almost half a century. By the 3rd week, Martha could no longer ignore the rash. What had begun as a mild irritation had evolved into a constellation of angry welts that burned beneath her clothing. Each morning, she awoke to fresh evidence of its expansion, red marks appearing on previously unblemished skin, as though malevolent stars were being added to a painful galaxy across her back. "This isn't normal," she murmured to Liberty, who watched with feline concern as Martha contorted before the bathroom mirror, trying to assess the damage. The cat's tail flicked anxiously as Martha winced, applying the last of her hydrocortisone cream to the worst spots. Martha had treated countless skin conditions during her nursing career. The methodical part of her brain, the part that had remained calm during mass casualty events in Vietnam, cataloged her symptoms clinically: irregular pattern, intense pruritus, possible nocturnal progression. The emotional part of her brain, however, felt a growing unease. This was different from anything she'd encountered before. Her first stop was the pharmacy, where she purchased stronger over-the-counter remedies. The young pharmacist barely looked at her, simply pointing toward the skincare aisle when Martha attempted to describe her symptoms. She selected an anti-itch cream, antihistamines, and tea tree oil, remedies she'd recommended to patients countless times. "That'll be $42.87, the cashier announced, and Martha hesitated before retrieving her wallet. Almost $50 for what might be a temporary solution. A small voice in her head whispered about the Paris Fund, but she silenced it. Health came first. Robert would have insisted on that. None of the remedies worked. By the end of the week, Martha found small blood spots on her sheets, evidence of nocturnal scratching she couldn't remember. The itching had become so intense it disrupted her sleep, leaving her exhausted and foggy-headed during the day. Her skin felt hot to the touch, and certain areas seemed to throb with a life of their own. "I need to see a doctor," she finally admitted to Liberty, who had taken to sleeping at the foot of the bed rather than next to Martha's increasingly restless form. Dr. James Reynolds's waiting room was painted a soothing sage green, with framed diplomas lining the walls. Martha had scheduled an early morning appointment, hoping to be seen promptly. Instead, she waited 90 minutes, watching as younger patients who had arrived after her were called in first. "Mrs. Sullivan?" The nurse's voice held the slightly elevated tone people often used with the elderly, as though volume could compensate for assumed cognitive decline. "The doctor will see you now." Dr. Reynolds was younger than Martha had expected, perhaps in his early 50s, with stylish glasses and a distracted manner. He glanced at her chart briefly. "What seems to be the problem today, Mrs. Sullivan?" "I have a rash that's been spreading for almost 3 weeks. It's quite painful, and nothing I've tried has helped." Martha turned slightly, indicating her back. "It's primarily here, though it's spreading to my sides and shoulders." Dr. Reynolds nodded absently, tapping his pen against his clipboard. "Any history of eczema or psoriasis?" "No, nothing like that. I was a nurse for 45 years. And I've never experienced anything similar." Something flickered across Dr. Reynolds' face. Annoyance? Impatience? "Let's have a look, then." His examination was cursory at best. He lifted her blouse just enough to glimpse the affected area, barely touching the inflamed skin before stepping back. "Looks like you've got bedbugs, Mrs. Sullivan." Martha blinked in surprise. "Bedbugs? But my apartment is immaculate, and the pattern doesn't match bedbug bites. They typically appear in lines or clusters. These are scattered and irregular." "Doctor." Reynolds' smile didn't reach his eyes. "With all due respect to your nursing experience, bedbug presentations can vary. The elderly often have atypical reactions due to thinning skin and decreased immune response." The dismissal stung more than the rash. Martha straightened her spine, the posture that had carried her through battlefield hospitals and emergency rooms. "I understand that, doctor, but—" "I'm going to prescribe a stronger topical steroid," he interrupted, already writing on his prescription pad. "And I recommend a thorough cleaning of your bedding and furniture. Hot water wash for everything fabric, and you might want to contact pest control." Could it be something else? Perhaps we should do some tests, Martha persisted. Dr. Reynolds sighed, removing his glasses to polish them with his lab coat. Mrs. Sullivan, at your age, it's common to worry about every new symptom. But this is a straightforward case. Bedbugs are extremely common in senior living facilities, regardless of cleanliness. The appointment lasted less than 7 minutes. Martha left with a prescription and a pamphlet on bedbugs, feeling as though she had somehow failed an unspoken test. Outside the clinic, she paused to catch her breath, the sun too bright against her tired eyes. "He didn't even really look," she whispered to herself. That night, Martha followed Dr. Reynolds's instructions meticulously. She washed every piece of bedding in the hottest water possible, vacuumed every corner of her apartment, and applied the prescribed cream. The process exhausted her limited energy, leaving her trembling as she finally collapsed into her stripped bed. Morning brought no relief. Instead, new welts had appeared, including several on her upper thighs which hadn't been affected before. The itching had intensified to a burning sensation that made wearing clothes painful. "This isn't right," Martha told Liberty, who watched from the dresser as Martha gingerly dressed herself. "Those aren't bedbug bites." Martha had encountered bedbugs during her nursing career, particularly when treating homeless patients. The bites were distinctive, small, red welts often appearing in a line described by many as the breakfast, lunch, and dinner pattern. What covered her skin now was something altogether different. Her neighbor, Walter Nichols, noticed her discomfort that afternoon as she collected her mail. At 75, Walter was one of the few residents older than Martha at Evergreen Senior Living. A widower with a perpetual bow tie and neatly combed white hair, he had always been cordial but distant, until now. "Martha, are you feeling all right?" he asked, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in concern. "You seem to be in pain." Something about his genuine concern broke through her practiced stoicism. "I have this rash that won't go away. The doctor says it's bedbugs, but I've treated bedbug bites before, and this is different." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "My Elaine had terrible skin reactions to certain medications before she passed. Sometimes doctors miss things on the first go-round. Have you considered getting a second opinion?" Martha clutched her mail tighter. "The copay for the first visit nearly wiped out my monthly prescription budget. I'm not sure I can afford another opinion right now." "Well, that's just not right," Walter said firmly. "You took care of others your whole life, and now, when you need care, it's too expensive?" He shook his head in disgust. "This country's got its priorities all mixed up." Later that evening, Martha stood in her bathroom, contorting to photograph the rash with her old flip phone. The images were blurry, but showed the angry red landscape her back had become. As she lowered her blouse, she noticed something that sent a chill through her. One of the larger welts seemed to shift slightly under her skin. "That's not possible," she whispered, leaning closer to the mirror. But when she watched carefully, there it was again. A subtle movement, as though something beneath the surface was repositioning itself. Martha's heart pounded. During her time in Vietnam, she had treated soldiers with parasitic infections, tropical insects that burrowed under the skin or laid eggs in open wounds. But this was Connecticut, not Southeast Asia. Such things didn't happen here, or did they? That night, Martha barely slept. Every itch, every sensation on her skin jerked her back to wakefulness. By morning, she was feverish and disoriented. The prescription cream Dr. Reynolds had given her sat unused on her nightstand. Her instincts told her it would be ineffective against whatever was truly afflicting her. With trembling hands, she called the clinic again, requesting an urgent appointment. The receptionist's voice was cool, professional. "Dr. Reynolds doesn't have any openings for 3 weeks, Mrs. Sullivan." "This is an emergency," Martha insisted, her voice cracking. "The rash is spreading, and I believe there might be something moving under my skin. A pause on the line. Are you experiencing hallucinations, Mrs. Sullivan? The implication was clear. They thought she was confused, possibly suffering from dementia. Martha closed her eyes, summoning the authoritative tone she had used when directing emergency room triage. I am experiencing a severe dermatological reaction with possible parasitic involvement. I need to be seen today, if not by Dr. Reynolds, then by someone else. Her insistence earned her an appointment with the on-call physician that afternoon, a young doctor who seemed barely out of medical school. His examination was slightly more thorough than Dr. Reynolds's had been, but his conclusion was the same. These appear to be bedbug bites with an allergic component, he stated, prescribing an antihistamine in addition to the steroid cream. The movement you're describing is likely muscle spasms from the inflammatory response. It's quite common, especially in patients of your age group. Martha left the clinic feeling defeated. The prescription co-pays had cost her another $45, money she could ill afford to waste on ineffective treatments. As she passed the community center, she noticed several of her neighbors gathered for the weekly bridge game. Normally, she would have joined them, but the thought of sitting uncomfortably for hours, hiding her pain, was unbearable. Diane Cooper, the community manager, waved her over. "Martha, we've missed you at bridge. Are you feeling under the weather?" Martha hesitated. Diane was pleasant enough, but she represented the management company that owned Evergreen Senior Living. Admitting to a potential bedbug infestation could have consequences. "Just a bit tired lately," Martha replied with a forced smile. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. "Several residents mentioned you might be having some skin issues. I hope it's nothing serious. We take pest control very seriously here at Evergreen." The implication was clear. If Martha had bedbugs, it was a reflection on her, not on the facility. "The doctor thinks it's just an allergic reaction," Martha lied, unwilling to become the subject of community gossip or worse, scrutiny from management. "Well, if you need any recommendations for cleaning services, let me know," Diane said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We can't be too careful with these things." That night, the itching became unbearable. Martha found herself standing in a cold shower at 3 a.m., letting the water numb her inflamed skin. As she toweled off, she caught sight of herself in the mirror, a thin, elderly woman with hollowed eyes and angry red welts visible even on her neck and arms. For the first time, she felt afraid. "What's happening to me, Robert?" she whispered to the empty bathroom, wishing her husband were there to help her make sense of this nightmare. Martha Sullivan had faced many challenges in her 70 years, war, loss, grief. But never had she felt so completely alone and unheard as she did now, standing in her bathroom in the middle of the night, watching something unknown taking over her body inch by inch. By the 5th week, Martha's condition had deteriorated significantly. The rash now covered nearly 60% of her body, creeping down her arms and legs like an invading army. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by bouts of intense itching that left her sheets spotted with blood. The pain had become her constant companion, more faithful than even Liberty, who now watched her mistress with wary eyes from atop the bookshelf. Martha had always prided herself on her independence. She had weathered Robert's death, then Michael's, standing straight-backed at their funerals, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. But this invisible enemy was eroding her strength in ways grief never had. Simple tasks, buttoning a blouse, reaching for a cereal bowl, even sitting in her favorite armchair, had become exercises in endurance. "Just a little longer," she told herself each morning, applying the useless prescription creams with trembling hands. Something has to change soon. It was Walter who finally intervened. He had knocked on her door with a container of homemade soup, his bow tie slightly askew, concern evident in the deep furrows of his brow. "Good Lord, Martha," he gasped when she opened the door. The rash had crept up her neck, angry red splotches visible above her collar. Her eyes were sunken with exhaustion, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her cardigan closed. "It's not as bad as it looks," she lied, the nurse in her still attempting to comfort others despite her own distress. Walter wasn't fooled. He set the soup container down on her entryway table with deliberate care. "I'm taking you to the emergency room," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Not tomorrow, not next week, right now." Martha felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. How long had it been since someone had advocated for her with such conviction? "The last doctor said it was just bedbugs," she whispered. "What if they send me home again?" Walter's jaw tightened. "Then we'll go to another hospital, and another after that if we need to. But this," he gestured to her reddened skin, "is not normal, and it's certainly not bedbugs." The emergency room at St. Vincent's Hospital was crowded with the usual Friday night chaos: drunk college students, workplace injuries, children with high fevers. Martha and Walter waited for 4 hours before a triage nurse finally called her name. By then, Martha was feverish, her skin burning beneath her clothing. "The doctor will be with you shortly," the nurse promised after recording Martha's elevated temperature and blood pressure. That "shortly" stretched into another hour. When Dr. Bennett finally swept into the examination room, he barely looked up from his tablet. "Mrs. Sullivan, says here you have a rash you believe is from bedbugs?" Martha exchanged a glance with Walter, who had refused to leave her side. "That was the initial diagnosis, but it hasn't responded to any treatments, and I'm quite certain it's not bedbugs." Dr. Bennett nodded absently. "Let's have a look then." His examination was more thorough than her previous doctor's, but his conclusion was frustratingly similar. "This appears to be a severe allergic reaction, possibly to bedbugs or another environmental irritant. I'm going to give you a steroid injection and prescribe a stronger topical treatment." "Doctor," Martha said, summoning her professional voice from decades in emergency rooms, "I was a nurse for 45 years. I've treated thousands of allergic reactions and bedbug infestations. This is different. Something seems to be moving under my skin." Dr. Bennett's expression shifted subtly, a look Martha recognized all too well, the look medical professionals gave when they suspected a patient might be confused or delusional. "Movement sensations are common with severe pruritus, Mrs. Sullivan. The brain can interpret intense itching as movement." "She's not imagining things," Walter interjected firmly. "I've seen it myself. There's something under her skin." Dr. Bennett glanced at Walter, then back to Martha. "I understand your concern, but without evidence of parasitic infection, which would be extremely rare in this region, we have to go with the most likely diagnosis. I'm also going to recommend a follow-up with a dermatologist." Martha felt a wave of despair wash over her. Another dismissal, another prescription that wouldn't work, another referral that would take weeks to secure. "Can you at least do some tests? A skin scraping or biopsy?" Dr. Bennett hesitated. "Insurance typically won't cover those without clear indication of something beyond dermatitis." "I'll pay out of pocket," Martha said. Though the words sent a pang through her heart, the Paris fund would have to be sacrificed. But what choice did she have? "Doctor—" Bennett seemed surprised by her insistence. "Let me consult with dermatology. There's a resident on call tonight who might be able to see you." After he left, Walter took Martha's hand, his papery skin cool against her fevered palm. "You've got more fight in you than all these doctors combined," he said with gruff admiration. An hour later, Dr. Eliza Wilson from dermatology entered the room. She was younger than Martha had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Sullivan?" I understand you're experiencing a severe rash with possible movement sensations? She approached Martha with an outstretched hand. I'm Dr. Wilson, dermatology. Martha shook her hand, noticing that Dr. Wilson actually looked at her, not at her chart, not at the computer, but directly at her face. It was a small courtesy that had become rare in her recent medical encounters. Yes, it started about 5 weeks ago. It's been progressively worsening despite multiple treatments for supposed bedbug bites. Dr. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. May I examine you? I'd like to take a really thorough look. The examination that followed was meticulous. Dr. Wilson donned gloves and examined every inch of affected skin, taking photographs and making detailed notes. When she reached Martha's upper back, she paused, leaning in closer. Mrs. Sullivan, when exactly do you feel the movement sensations? Martha considered the question. Most often at night, but sometimes during the day if I'm very still. It's most noticeable in the areas where the rash first appeared. Dr. Wilson's expression remained professional, but Martha noticed a slight tension in her posture. I'd like to perform a skin scraping and possibly a small biopsy. Would that be all right with you? Yes, please, Martha said, relief washing over her. Finally, someone was taking her seriously. As doctor? Wilson prepared the necessary tools. She made casual conversation. So, you were a nurse. Where did you practice? I started at Massachusetts General, then volunteered as a field nurse in Vietnam. After that, I worked in emergency medicine at St. Vincent's, this very hospital actually, until my retirement 10 years ago. Dr. Wilson's hands stilled momentarily. Vietnam. You wouldn't have been at the field hospital near Da Nang in 1968, would you? Martha looked up in surprise. I was, from January through November of '68. A strange expression crossed Dr. Wilson's face. My father was a Marine. He was treated at that hospital after his unit was ambushed. He always told stories about a red-headed nurse who saved his leg when the doctors wanted to amputate. She hesitated. He had a photograph of her in his study. I grew up looking at it. Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with her fever. What was your father's name? James Wilson. Private First Class, 3rd Battalion. Martha closed her eyes, memories flooding back. Gangrene in his right calf. The doctors gave him a 10% chance of keeping the leg, but I insisted on trying an experimental debridement technique. She opened her eyes to find Dr. Wilson staring at her in astonishment. That was you, Martha Sullivan? Dr. Wilson shook her head in disbelief. My father named me Eliza after his grandmother, but my middle name is Martha, after you. The examination room fell silent save for the distant beeping of hospital monitors. Walter cleared his throat, clearly moved by the coincidence. Seems like the universe has a way of bringing the right people together when they're needed most. Dr. Wilson composed herself, though her eyes remained bright with emotion. I can't believe... She stopped, visibly refocusing on the task at hand. Let me get these samples. I want to run some tests that aren't typically ordered for rashes. If something is moving, we need to identify it. The skin scraping was uncomfortable but brief. The biopsy was more painful, a small circular punch that removed a tiny cylinder of skin from Martha's shoulder blade. Dr. Wilson worked efficiently, explaining each step of the process. I'm going to examine these immediately, she said as she labeled the samples. Normally, these would go to the lab and results would take days, but I want to look at them myself under the microscope tonight. As Dr. Wilson left with the samples, Martha felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. What are the odds? She murmured to Walter. Out of all the doctors in this hospital. Walter smiled, patting her hand. Maybe your Robert is pulling some strings up there. The wait seemed interminable. Martha's fever had risen, and the nurses had provided acetaminophen to bring it down. Walter dozed in the chair beside her bed, his bow tie now completely undone, hanging limply around his neck. When Dr. Wilson finally returned, her expression was grave. She closed the door behind her carefully before approaching Martha's bedside. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've found something in your samples that I've never seen before." Her voice was measured, professional, but Martha could detect the underlying concern. "There appears to be evidence of a parasitic infestation in your skin." Martha felt a surge of vindication followed immediately by dread. "What kind of parasite?" "That's the concerning part. I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't match anything in our standard reference materials." Dr. Wilson pulled up a chair, sitting at eye level with Martha. "I need to ask you some questions that might seem unusual. Have you traveled internationally recently?" "No, not since a cruise to the Bahamas 3 years ago." "Have you received any packages from overseas or purchased any imported products?" Martha started to shake her head, then paused. "I bought a new armchair about 2 months ago. It was on clearance at Furniture World. They said it was a luxury American brand, but I suppose it could have been manufactured elsewhere." Dr. Wilson made a note. "Any new linens, clothing, or other fabric items?" "No, nothing else new." "What about visitors? Has anyone who's traveled internationally recently been in your home?" Martha thought of her quiet apartment, the limited visitors she received. "No, just the usual neighbors and my cat." Dr. Wilson nodded, making additional notes. "I'm going to consult with infectious disease and parasitology. In the meantime, I'm admitting you to the hospital. We need to start you on anti-parasitic medication and monitor you closely." Walter, now fully awake, leaned forward. "You believe her, then? That something is actually moving under her skin?" Dr. Wilson's expression was somber. "Yes, Mr. Nichols. Something is definitely moving under her skin, and we need to identify it and eliminate it as quickly as possible." The admission process was a blur of paperwork, insurance verifications, and uncomfortable questions about advance directives. Martha provided her Medicare information, wincing internally at the thought of what her portion of the bills would be. The Paris fund would certainly be depleted, but at this point she was fighting for more than a vacation. She was fighting for her health, possibly her life. As they wheeled her to a private room on the 5th floor, isolation protocol, Dr. Wilson had explained, until they knew exactly what they were dealing with, Martha caught sight of the first bill estimate on the nurse's clipboard, $3,750 per day, not including specialist consultations or specific treatments. "Don't you worry about that now," Walter said, noticing her expression. He had insisted on accompanying her to her room, defying the nurse's suggestions that he go home and rest. "Let's get you well first. Money is just money." But Martha knew better. At 70, with only her modest pension and Social Security, financial recovery would be nearly impossible. The Paris Fund, her last connection to Robert's promise, would vanish, and with it, the dream they had shared for nearly 50 years. That night, alone in her hospital room, Martha wept silently. Not from the pain, which was considerable, nor from fear of the unknown creatures invading her body. She wept for Paris, for Robert, for promises that would remain unfulfilled. Liberty would be fed by Walter until she could return home. But the cat was old. How much time did either of them have left? Martha's solitary grief was interrupted by a soft knock at her door. Dr. Wilson entered, now wearing a fresh lab coat, though the lateness of the hour was evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "I thought you might still be awake," she said, approaching Martha's bed. "The pain medication can only do so much when you're worried." Martha hastily wiped her eyes. "Just feeling sorry for myself. Not very productive, is it?" Dr. Wilson smiled gently. "I'd say you've earned the right." She pulled up a chair. "I wanted to let you know that I've consulted with Dr. Chambers from parasitology. He's reviewing the samples and will see you first thing tomorrow morning." "Thank you." Martha said, genuinely moved by the young doctor's dedication. "You've gone above and beyond." Dr. Wilson shook her head. "No, I'm just doing what should have been done weeks ago." She hesitated, then added, "My father passed away last year. He would never forgive me if I didn't do everything possible for the woman who saved his leg, and by extension gave him the life that led to my existence." Martha felt a connection to this woman that transcended their brief acquaintance, a thread stretching back through decades, connecting Vietnam to Connecticut, past to present. Life has a strange way of coming full circle, doesn't it? Dr. Wilson nodded, her expression softening. "Get some rest, Mrs. Sullivan. Tomorrow we start fighting back against whatever has invaded your body, and I promise you, we will not stop until you're well again." As Dr. Wilson left, Martha settled back against her pillows, her mind drifting to the jungles of Vietnam, to field hospitals and wounded soldiers, to a young Marine with gangrene and the experimental treatment that saved his leg. She had been so certain then, so confident in her abilities, that Martha seemed a lifetime away now. But perhaps, she thought as sleep finally began to claim her, that fighting spirit wasn't entirely gone. Perhaps it had just been dormant, waiting for the right moment, and the right ally to reawaken. Martha awakened to the unfamiliar sounds of hospital machinery, the rhythmic beep of her heart monitor, the gentle hiss of oxygen through the nasal cannula they'd placed during the night when her levels had dropped. Sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting striped shadows across her blanket. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind until the burning sensation beneath her skin reminded her of exactly where she was and why. A young nurse entered, her cheerful demeanor at odds with the gravity of Martha's situation. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm Nurse Sarah. How are we feeling today?" Martha suppressed a wince at the collective "we." In her 45 years of nursing, she had never asked a patient how we were feeling. "The itching is worse this morning," she replied honestly, "and there's more movement, especially across my shoulders." Sarah's professional smile faltered slightly. Dr. Wilson left orders for additional pain and anti-itch medication. "I'll get those for you right away. Dr. Chambers from parasitology will be by shortly." As the nurse busied herself checking vital signs, Martha caught sight of her reflection in the darkened television screen across the room. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, hollow-cheeked, gray-faced, with visible red patches creeping up her neck toward her jawline. When had she become so frail? Dr. Thomas Chambers arrived just after 9, accompanied by Dr. Wilson. He was older than Martha had expected, perhaps in his 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a bow tie that reminded her of Walter. The parasitologist carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the final authority in his field. "Mrs. Sullivan," he greeted her, his voice deep and measured. "Dr. Wilson has shared your case with me. May I examine you?" The examination that followed was even more thorough than Dr. Wilson's had been. "Doctor." Chambers used a specialized magnifying lens with a light attachment, scrutinizing every centimeter of affected skin. His expression remained neutral, but Martha, who had spent decades reading doctors' micro-expressions, could sense his growing concern. "When you report movement sensations," he asked, focusing on a particularly inflamed area on her back, "is it directional? Can you tell if whatever you're feeling is moving toward or away from anything?" The question startled Martha. No one had asked her to characterize the movement before. "It seems to be moving outward, from where the rash first began toward the edges of the affected areas. And it's more active at night." Dr. Chambers nodded thoughtfully. "Nocturnal activity is consistent with many parasitic species." He straightened up, removing his gloves. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'd like to perform a more extensive biopsy and run some specialized tests, with your permission, of course." Whatever you need to do, Martha replied. And the professional part of her brain appreciated his methodical approach. The patient part was simply relieved to be taken seriously. I should warn you, Dr. Chambers continued, the type of biopsy I'm proposing is more involved than what Dr. Wilson performed last night. It will require local anesthesia and may leave a small scar. Martha almost laughed. Doctor, at 70, I'm well past worrying about a few more scars. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair enough. We'll schedule it for this afternoon. In the meantime, I'd like to start you on a broad-spectrum anti-parasitic medication. It's somewhat experimental in this application, but given the unusual nature of your symptoms, I believe it's warranted. After the doctors left, Walter arrived, freshly showered and wearing a different bow tie, carrying a small overnight bag. I brought some of your things, he explained, setting the bag on the visitor's chair. Your nightgown, slippers, that book from your nightstand. And then I fed Liberty this morning. She's missing you something fierce. The kindness of this relative stranger, a neighbor she had exchanged pleasantries with but never truly known until now, brought unexpected tears to Martha's eyes. You didn't have to do all this, Walter. He waved away her gratitude. Neighbors help neighbors. That's how it's supposed to be. He settled into the chair, adjusting his bow tie. Now, tell me what these doctors are saying. Martha explained Dr. Chambers' assessment and the planned biopsy. Walter listened intently, asking occasional clarifying questions that revealed a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of medical procedures. You seem very knowledgeable about all this, Martha observed. Walter's expression grew distant. Elaine, my wife, had a long illness before she passed. Cancer. 5 years of treatments, procedures, clinical trials. You learn a lot when someone you love is suffering. He refocused on Martha. Speaking of which, has anyone discussed the financial aspects with you yet? Martha shook her head. Not specifically, but I saw the preliminary estimate. It's substantial. Walter's bushy eyebrows drew together. Medicare should cover most of it, shouldn't it? Medicare has its limits, Martha explained, and some of these tests and treatments might be considered experimental or unnecessary without a confirmed diagnosis. There will be significant out-of-pocket expenses. That's not right, Walter muttered. You pay into a system your whole working life, and when you really need it. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a hospital administrator, a sleek woman in her 40s with a tablet computer and an apologetic smile. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Vanessa from Patient Financial Services. I need to discuss some insurance matters with you. Walter stood. I'll wait outside. No, Martha said quickly. Please stay. She needed an ally, someone to witness whatever was coming. Vanessa glanced between them before continuing. We've been in contact with your Medicare administrator. Unfortunately, they're classifying some of Dr. Chambers' proposed treatments as investigational, and therefore not fully covered under your plan. Martha had expected this, but the confirmation still stung. What will my responsibility be? Vanessa tapped at her tablet. For the specialized biopsy and initial treatment course, your estimated out-of-pocket cost will be approximately $4,200. If further specialized treatments are needed, that figure could increase significantly. The Paris Fund, Martha thought numbly. Gone in an instant. That's highway robbery, Walter interjected. She's paid taxes her whole life for medical care, and now when she has something serious, they're nickel and diming her? Vanessa's professional demeanor didn't waver. I understand your frustration, sir, but these are the coverage limitations. We do offer payment plans, and there are some assistance programs Mrs. Sullivan might qualify for. After Vanessa left, Walter paced the small hospital room like a caged lion. It's not right, Martha. It's just not right. It's the system we have, Martha replied wearily. I've watched it fail patients for decades. I just never expected to be one of them. The biopsy was scheduled for 3 o'clock. Dr. Chambers arrived with 2 assistants and a tray of intimidating instruments. Walter had reluctantly gone home to rest, promising to return in the evening. "We're going to take several small tissue samples from different areas," Dr. Chambers explained as his assistants prepared Martha's skin with antiseptic. "The local anesthetic will sting initially, but then you should only feel pressure." The procedure was uncomfortable but bearable. Martha had endured far worse pain in her life. As Dr. Chambers worked, she found herself thinking of Robert, of how he had endured pain with quiet dignity during his battle with cancer. "Just part of the journey, Marty," he had told her, using his special nickname for her. "Every mile brings us closer to Paris." Paris. The dream that had sustained them through difficult times. The promise that had kept her going after his death. Now that dream was dissolving before her eyes, sacrificed to the reality of American healthcare economics. "All finished," Dr. Chambers announced, interrupting her melancholy thoughts. "You did very well, Mrs. Sullivan. I'll analyze these samples personally and should have some preliminary results this evening." As the afternoon faded into evening, Martha's fever spiked again. The movement sensations beneath her skin intensified, as though whatever was living there had been agitated by the biopsy procedure. Nurse Sarah administered additional medication, but the relief was minimal. Dr. Wilson stopped by around 7, her face betraying concern when she saw Martha's condition. "The fever's not responding as well as we'd hoped to the antipyretics," she noted, reviewing the chart. "I'm going to add a different antibiotic to your regimen." "You think there's a secondary infection?" Martha asked, her nurse's mind still functioning despite her discomfort. "It's a possibility. Your white blood cell count is elevated." Dr. Wilson sat on the edge of the bed, her professional demeanor softening. "I spoke with Dr. Chambers about an hour ago. He's still analyzing the samples, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" Martha prompted. "He's found something he hasn't seen before. He's consulting with colleagues at the CDC and several tropical medicine specialists." The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. If a parasitologist with Dr. Chambers' experience was seeking outside consultation, Martha's condition was truly unusual and potentially dangerous. "Am I contagious?" Martha asked, the nurse in her immediately concerned for others. "There's no evidence of that so far," Dr. Wilson assured her. "Whatever this is appears to be confined to your tissues, not transmissible through casual contact." A knock at the door interrupted them. Walter entered, followed by Nurse Sarah pushing a medication cart. "Sorry to interrupt, Doctor," Sarah said. "It's time for Mrs. Sullivan's evening medications." Dr. Wilson stood. "I'll check back later tonight after Dr. Chambers has completed his analysis." As Nurse Sarah administered the various medications through Martha's IV line, Walter settled into the visitor's chair, his expression troubled. "You look worse than this morning," he observed bluntly. Martha attempted a smile. "Always the charmer, Walter." His weathered face creased with concern. "I spoke with Diane at Evergreen today. Told her you'd be in the hospital for a while." Martha tensed. "What did she say?" Walter's expression darkened. "She asked if your condition was contagious and whether the apartment would need to be treated. I told her it wasn't bedbugs, if that's what she was implying." Martha closed her eyes briefly. She could imagine the whispers already circulating among the residents. Martha Sullivan with her mysterious ailment, possibly bringing pests into their immaculate community. "Thank you for handling that," she said finally. "There's something else," Walter added, his voice lowering as Nurse Sarah left the room. "I went by your apartment to check on Liberty again. Martha, I think there might be something wrong with your new chair." Martha frowned. "The armchair? What do you mean?" "When I was filling Liberty's water bowl, I noticed something strange about the piping on the armrest. There seemed to be small holes, almost like something had eaten through the fabric from the inside out. He leaned forward. And when I looked closer, I saw what looked like tiny casings or shells near the base. A chill ran through Martha that had nothing to do with her fever. "Did you take photos?" Walter nodded, pulling out his flip phone. "Not very clear, but you can see what I mean." The images were indeed blurry, but Martha could make out what appeared to be small perforations in the chair's fabric and tiny translucent casings on the floor beside it. Her mind raced back to her nursing days, to a young soldier from rural Georgia who had returned from patrol with similar mysterious bites. The diagnosis had been a tropical beetle that laid eggs in upholstery, the larvae eventually emerging through the host's skin. But that had been Vietnam, not Connecticut, and surely no American furniture manufacturer would. American. The chair had been marketed as luxury American-made furniture at a surprisingly affordable price. Martha had been proud of finding such a bargain. "Walter," she said urgently, "I need you to tell Dr. Chambers and Dr. Wilson about this right away. Show them these photos." Before Walter could respond, Martha's monitor began to alarm. Her heart rate had spiked, and she suddenly felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The movement beneath her skin intensified dramatically, as though whatever was there had suddenly become more active. Nurse Sarah rushed in, quickly assessing the situation. "Your blood pressure is dropping, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm going to page Dr. Wilson." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Wilson arrived, barking orders for additional medications. Martha's consciousness began to fade at the edges, the voices around her seeming to come from a great distance. "Stay with us, Martha," Dr. Wilson urged, her professional composure cracking slightly. "Your body's mounting an inflammatory response. We need to get it under control." Through the haze, Martha was aware of Walter showing his phone to Dr. Wilson, of urgent conversations, of someone mentioning Dr. Chambers' name. Then darkness claimed her, pulling her down into blessed unconsciousness where the burning and itching could no longer reach her. She dreamed of Robert, young and handsome in his dress uniform, holding out his hand to her. "Not yet, Marty," he said gently. "You still have that promise to keep." When Martha regained consciousness, the room was dimly lit, and the first face she saw was Dr. Chambers. He was speaking intently with Dr. Wilson and another man in a suit she didn't recognize. Walter dozed in the corner chair, his bow tie askew. "She's awake," Dr. Wilson noticed first, moving quickly to Martha's bedside. "Mrs. Sullivan, you had a severe inflammatory response. We've managed to stabilize you, but you gave us quite a scare." Martha's mouth was dry, her thoughts sluggish. "What happened?" Dr. Chambers approached, his expression grave yet somehow excited, the look of a scientist on the verge of a significant discovery. "Mrs. Sullivan, your neighbor's observations about your furniture proved incredibly valuable. We believe we've identified the source of your infestation." Martha struggled to focus. "The chair?" "Yes. Based on the photos and our analysis of your tissue samples, we believe you've been exposed to a parasitic insect species not normally found in North America." Dr. Chambers adjusted his glasses. "It appears to be a variant of Cimex lectularius, the common bedbug, but with significant genetic differences that make it far more invasive and resistant to traditional treatments." "A bedbug?" Martha whispered, the irony not lost on her. The doctors who had dismissed her had been partially right, after all. "Not exactly," Dr. Chambers corrected. "This appears to be a hybrid species, possibly resulting from accidental crossbreeding in manufacturing facilities where furniture components from different regions are assembled. The larvae burrow much deeper than standard bedbugs, creating the movement sensations you've been experiencing as they migrate through subcutaneous tissue." The third man stepped forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Richard Donovan from the Centers for Disease Control. We'd like your permission to send a team to your apartment to examine this furniture and ensure there isn't a broader public health concern. Martha's nurse's training kicked in through the fog of medication. Of course, whatever you need. Walter had awakened during the conversation and now moved to stand protectively near Martha's bed. She bought that chair from Furniture World, he informed them. They claimed it was American-made luxury furniture. Dr. Wilson made a note. We'll need that information for the investigation. Investigation? Martha repeated weakly. Richard Donovan's expression was grim. If this is indeed a new hybrid species being inadvertently imported through furniture marketed as American-made, it represents a significant public health concern. There could be other cases that have been misdiagnosed. Martha thought of all the elderly patients dismissed by doctors, their complaints attributed to confusion or attention-seeking. How many others might be suffering as she had been, unheard and untreated? What happens now? She asked, struggling to process all this information through her medication haze. We've started you on a specialized anti-parasitic treatment, Dr. Wilson explained. It's already showing promising results in reducing the inflammatory response. The next step will be a more aggressive treatment to eliminate the remaining parasites. The costs, Martha began, her practical mind still worried about the mounting expenses. The CDC will be covering the costs of your treatment as part of our investigation, Richard Donovan interjected. Your case is providing valuable public health information. Relief washed over Martha, though it was quickly followed by a wave of exhaustion. Dr. Wilson noticed immediately. You need to rest. Your body has been through a tremendous ordeal. As the doctors and CDC representative filed out, Walter remained, his weathered face creased with concern. I'll stay a while longer, he said, settling back into the chair. Just to make sure you're all right. Martha felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Walter, why are you doing all this? We hardly knew each other before this happened. Walter was quiet for a moment, adjusting his bow tie with practiced fingers. When Elaine was sick, we had no one. Our children live across the country, too busy with their own lives to help much. Our neighbors in the old neighborhood kept their distance, as though cancer might be contagious. His eyes met hers, clear and direct. I promised myself that if I ever saw someone else fighting alone, I wouldn't stand by and watch. A simple promise, made from one human being to another. Like the promise Robert had made to her about Paris. A commitment born of love and hope. As Martha drifted back to sleep, she found herself thinking not of the parasites invading her body, nor of the mounting medical bills that might now be covered, but of promises. The ones we make to those we love, and sometimes the unexpected ones made by strangers who become something more. The specialized treatment began at dawn. Martha awakened to find her room transformed into something resembling a minor surgical suite. Dr. Chambers and Dr. Wilson stood at the foot of her bed in full protective gear, not because her condition was contagious, Dr. Wilson hastened to explain, but because the procedure required absolute sterility. We're going to use a combination approach, Dr. Chambers explained, his voice slightly muffled through his mask. A more potent systemic anti-parasitic medication administered intravenously, along with a localized treatment for the most heavily affected areas. Martha nodded, summoning her courage. After 45 years of nursing, she understood that effective treatments were rarely comfortable. Whatever it takes, she said simply. The localized treatment involved a series of micro-injections directly into the affected tissue, targeting the areas where movement had been most pronounced. Each injection burned like fire beneath her skin, but Martha endured it stoically, focusing on her breathing techniques, the same ones she had once taught to laboring mothers and wounded soldiers. You're doing remarkably well, Dr. Wilson commented during a brief pause. Most patients require sedation for this procedure. I've been on the other side of the needle more times than I can count, Martha replied, her voice tight with pain but steady. I always told my patients that understanding the purpose of pain makes it more bearable. Dr. Chambers nodded approvingly. A wise approach. We're nearly finished with this section. By mid-morning, the procedure was complete. Martha lay exhausted against her pillows, her body aching, but her mind strangely clear. The constant itching that had tormented her for weeks had subsided to a dull throb, and the sensation of movement, that horrifying awareness of something alive beneath her skin, had diminished significantly. The treatment appears to be working, Dr. Wilson said, reviewing Martha's latest vital signs. Your inflammatory markers are already decreasing, and your fever is responding to the medication. How long until... Martha hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. Until they're gone? Dr. Chambers removed his protective gear before answering. Based on what we know about the life cycle of similar species, the systemic medication should eliminate all living parasites within 48 to 72 hours. The tissue damage will take longer to heal, possibly several weeks for complete recovery. A small price to pay, Martha thought, for freedom from the nightmare she had been living. And my apartment? Liberty? The CDC team is there now, Dr. Wilson assured her. Mr. Nichols arranged for your cat to stay with Mrs. Hendricks down the hall from you. The team will thoroughly decontaminate your apartment with special attention to the armchair and any other potentially affected furniture. Walter arrived shortly after noon, bearing a small potted African violet and a surprisingly sophisticated fruit arrangement. Thought you might like something besides hospital food, he explained, setting the fruit on her bedside table. How are you feeling? Better, Martha said truthfully. The new treatment seems to be working. They think I might be able to go home in a few days. Walter beamed, adjusting his bow tie. Navy blue today, with small silver anchors. That's wonderful news. I've been keeping an eye on things at Evergreen. You should know that word has gotten around about what happened. Martha tensed. What are people saying? Nothing bad, Walter assured her quickly. Quite the opposite. Diane from management is in a complete panic. Turns out 3 other residents reported similar rashes last month and were told it was just dry skin or allergies. The CDC is interviewing them all. Martha felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication that she hadn't been imagining things, concern for her neighbors who might be suffering similarly, and a grim satisfaction that the management's dismissive attitude was being exposed. There's something else, Walter continued, his expression turning serious. A reporter from the Hartford Courier called the community center asking questions about parasitic furniture being sold to seniors. Apparently, the CDC investigation has attracted some attention. Martha hadn't considered the possibility of media interest. Her private medical ordeal becoming public knowledge was unsettling. Yet she recognized the potential importance. How many others might be suffering silently, dismissed by doctors and loved ones? Did they use my name? She asked. Not that I heard, Walter replied. But Diane was in quite a state about it, kept saying it would damage Evergreen's reputation if word got out that residents had been infected by parasites. Martha felt a flash of anger. I'm more concerned about the residents than Evergreen's reputation. That's exactly what I told her, Walter said with satisfaction. The afternoon brought a steady stream of medical personnel, nurses checking vitals, technicians drawing blood, specialists consulting on her case. By evening, Martha was exhausted from the constant interruptions and the lingering effects of the morning's procedure. Dr. Wilson stopped by one final time before ending her shift. The latest blood work shows significant improvement, she reported. The parasite count is dropping rapidly, and your body's inflammatory response is normalizing. Thank you, Martha said sincerely, for believing me when others didn't. Dr. Wilson's expression softened. I should be thanking you. Not just for today, but for what you did for my father all those years ago." She hesitated, then added, "I brought something I thought you might want to see." From her lab coat pocket, she withdrew a small, faded photograph protected in a plastic sleeve. It showed a much younger Martha, her red hair vibrant even in the washed-out colors of the old print, standing beside a hospital bed where a young Marine lay with his heavily bandaged leg elevated. Despite his obvious pain, the soldier was smiling up at her. "Dad kept this on his desk my entire life," Dr. Wilson said quietly. "He told everyone who would listen about the stubborn nurse who refused to let the doctors amputate his leg. He said you told him, 'This leg has places to go and things to do, and I'm not letting anyone take it from you.'" Martha's throat tightened with emotion as memories flooded back. The sweltering heat of the field hospital, the desperate shortage of antibiotics, her heated argument with the chief surgeon who had insisted amputation was the only option. "I remember him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He had a picture of a girl back home. He was so afraid she wouldn't want him if he came back missing a leg." Dr. Wilson nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "My mother. They were high school sweethearts. They got married 2 weeks after he came home." She carefully returned the photograph to her pocket. "Dad walked her down the aisle on that leg you saved. He coached my brother's Little League team. He danced at my wedding. All because you fought for him when others were ready to give up." The weight of those words settled over Martha like a warm blanket. In her darkest moments during these past weeks, dismissed by doctors, doubting her own sanity, watching her savings dwindle, she had sometimes wondered if her life had mattered, if the decades of service had left any lasting impact on the world. Here was her answer, standing before her in a white coat with her father's eyes. "Life has a strange way of coming full circle," Martha murmured, echoing their conversation from the previous night. "Indeed it does," Dr. Wilson agreed. "Get some rest, Mrs. Sullivan. I'll see you in the morning." After Dr. Wilson left, Martha found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept returning to the photograph, to the young Marine whose life she had fought for, and to his daughter who was now fighting for hers. The symmetry was both beautiful and humbling. A soft knock at her door interrupted her reflections. Richard Donovan from the CDC entered, looking haggard after what had clearly been a long day. "Mrs. Sullivan, I apologize for the late visit, but I wanted to update you personally on our findings at your apartment." He pulled up a chair, his expression grim. "We've confirmed that the armchair was indeed the source of the infestation. The parasites had established a breeding colony within the padding." Martha nodded, unsurprised. "And the furniture store, Furniture World?" "That's where things get interesting," Donovan replied, leaning forward. The chair was part of a line called American Heritage by a company called Bradford Luxury Furnishings. It was marketed as Made in America and priced accordingly. But it wasn't American-made, Martha guessed. Not entirely, no. The frame was manufactured in North Carolina, but the upholstery components, including the padding where we found the infestation, were imported from overseas, assembled in Mexico, then shipped to the U.S. for final construction. The company used a loophole in labeling requirements to claim the Made in America designation. Martha felt her anger rising. So they deceived consumers deliberately? "It appears so. And you weren't the only victim. We've already identified 7 similar cases in Connecticut alone, all linked to furniture from this manufacturer." Donovan ran a hand through his thinning hair. 5 of the 7 cases were initially dismissed by healthcare providers as bedbug bites, allergic reactions, or in 2 cases, psychosomatic symptoms. The implication was clear. Elderly patients, particularly women, often had their medical concerns minimized or dismissed as anxiety or confusion. Martha had seen it happen countless times during her nursing career, but experiencing it firsthand had been both infuriating and frightening. "What happens now?" she asked. "The Consumer Product Safety Commission is issuing an emergency recall of all furniture from this line. The FDA is involved due to the medical implications, and there will likely be criminal investigations into the company's practices." Donovan hesitated. "Mrs. Sullivan, your case may become significant from a legal standpoint. Would you be willing to speak with investigators about your experience?" Martha didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. If it helps prevent others from going through this, I'll tell my story to whoever needs to hear it." Donovan nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. There may also be media interest, though you're under no obligation to speak publicly." After he left, Martha lay back against her pillows, considering the implications. Her private medical nightmare had transformed into something larger, a public health issue, a consumer protection case, possibly even a criminal investigation. The nurse in her recognized the importance of speaking out, of using her experience to help others. The private woman in her felt exposed, vulnerable at the thought of strangers discussing her ordeal. Morning brought unexpected visitors. Walter arrived early, as had become his custom, but he was accompanied by Diane Cooper from Evergreen Management. The community manager looked distinctly uncomfortable, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled, her smile strained. "Mrs. Sullivan," she began, her voice overly bright, "I can't tell you how relieved we all are at Evergreen to hear you're recovering. The entire community sends their best wishes." Martha regarded her steadily, saying nothing. This was the same woman who had implied Martha's condition was her own fault, who had worried more about the facility's reputation than her residents' well-being. Diane shifted uneasily under Martha's gaze. "I wanted to personally assure you that we're taking this situation extremely seriously. We've hired an independent inspection company to examine all common areas and are offering free inspections to any residents with concerns." "How thoughtful," Martha replied dryly. "And the other residents who reported similar symptoms last month? The ones who were told it was just dry skin?" Diane paled visibly. There may have been some misunderstandings. We're reaching out to everyone who reported any skin issues in the past 6 months." Walter, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, cleared his throat. "Diane has also come with some news about your apartment, Martha." The community manager nodded quickly. Yes. The CDC team has completed their work, and I wanted to let you know that Evergreen will cover all costs for any necessary cleaning or replacement of affected items." Martha raised an eyebrow. "That's very generous. May I ask what prompted this offer?" Diane glanced at Walter, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, that is, Evergreen believes in taking care of our residents, and clearly this was an unusual situation that no one could have anticipated. The lawyers advised them it would be cheaper than the lawsuit you could file," Walter interjected bluntly, "especially since they ignored similar complaints from other residents." Diane shot him an exasperated look but didn't contradict him. "We'd also like to offer you 2 months of free rent once you return, as a gesture of goodwill." Before Martha could respond, Dr. Chambers entered the room, his expression brightening when he saw her. "Mrs. Sullivan, your latest test results are excellent. The parasite count is nearly undetectable, and your inflammatory markers have decreased by more than 60%. Diane used the doctor's arrival as an opportunity to make her exit, promising to be in touch about the details of the apartment remediation. Walter winked at Martha behind the manager's retreating back. "Was that the building manager?" Dr. Chambers asked, glancing over his shoulder. "Yes," Martha confirmed. "Suddenly very concerned about my well-being now that the CDC and possible lawyers are involved." Dr. Chambers nodded, understanding. "I've seen similar conversions before. Nothing motivates like potential liability." He turned his attention to her chart. "Now, let's discuss your progress. The treatment is working even better than anticipated. If this trajectory continues, we might be able to transition you to oral medication within 48 hours. The prospect of returning home, of sleeping in her own bed and reuniting with liberty, filled Martha with both longing and apprehension. Home meant independence, but also responsibility, managing her recovery, dealing with evergreen management, possibly speaking to investigators and reporters. As though reading her thoughts, Walter spoke up. "Don't worry about rushing back, Martha. Liberty is doing fine with Mrs. Hendricks, and I'm keeping an eye on your apartment. The CDC team was very thorough. They even took that armchair away for further study." Martha felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected ally who had appeared in her life just when she needed one most. "Walter, I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all you've done." He waved away her thanks. "Neighbors help neighbors. That's how it's supposed to be." He straightened his bow tie. "Forest green today with tiny gold fleur-de-lis. Besides, I'm not entirely altruistic. My afternoons were getting dreadfully dull before all this excitement." Dr. Chambers completed his examination, making detailed notes in her chart. "The tissue damage is healing nicely, though you'll likely have some scarring in the most affected areas. The important thing is that we're winning the battle against the parasites themselves." "And the other cases?" Martha asked. "The ones the CDC identified?" "All receiving appropriate treatment now," Dr. Chambers assured her. "Your case has created a ripple effect, Mrs. Sullivan. Medical centers across the region are being alerted to watch for similar presentations, particularly in patients who recently purchased new furniture." After the doctor left, Walter settled into the visitor's chair with the day's newspaper. "You've become something of a medical celebrity," he commented, folding back the paper to reveal a small headline on page 3. "CDC investigates parasitic furniture affecting Connecticut seniors." Martha peered at the article. "They didn't use my name." "Not yet," Walter agreed. "But there's mention of a 70-year-old former nurse whose medical knowledge helped identify the source of the infestation. Doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to connect those dots in a community the size of Evergreen." The thought of becoming the center of attention, the subject of community gossip or, worse, pity, made Martha deeply uncomfortable. Throughout her life, she had been the caregiver, the professional, the one others leaned on. Being cast as a victim, however resilient, felt foreign and unsettling. Yet another part of her recognized the importance of this story being told. How many elderly people were suffering in silence, their complaints dismissed by medical professionals or family members? How many companies were exploiting loopholes to deceive consumers, potentially endangering their health? "If telling my story helps others, then I'll tell it," she said finally. "But on my own terms, not as some helpless old woman who fell victim to greedy corporations and dismissive doctors." Walter smiled approvingly. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Martha Sullivan. You've got more fight in you than half the young people I know." That afternoon, Dr. Wilson brought unexpected news. "We've been contacted by Bradford Luxury Furnishings, the company that manufactured your armchair," she explained. "Apparently, their legal team is very interested in discussing a resolution to your situation." Martha frowned. "Resolution? You mean a settlement?" "Most likely. They're facing a major recall, potential criminal charges for fraudulent labeling, and possibly dozens of lawsuits from affected consumers." Dr. Wilson's expression was carefully neutral. "I'm telling you this as your physician because any legal discussions could impact your recovery. Stress isn't conducive to healing." "I appreciate your concern," Martha said, "but I'm not interested in a quick payoff that comes with a confidentiality agreement. Too many people could be at risk." Dr. Wilson nodded, a hint of approval in her eyes. "I thought you might say that. For what it's worth, The hospital's legal team has advised that you're under no obligation to speak with their representatives while you're still receiving treatment. A convenient buffer, Martha thought, giving her time to consider her options carefully. Thank you for letting me know. That evening, as twilight cast long shadows across her hospital room, Martha stood carefully at the window, looking out over the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. For the first time in weeks, she could stand without overwhelming pain, could take a deep breath without feeling the crawling sensation beneath her skin. Walter had gone home for the night, promising to return in the morning with decent coffee and the newspaper. The hospital had grown quiet, the daytime bustle giving way to the more subdued rhythm of night shifts. Martha thought about the chair that had caused her so much suffering, a seemingly innocent purchase that had nearly cost her her life. She thought about Dr. Reynolds, who had dismissed her concerns, about Diane Cooper, who had worried more about Evergreen's reputation than her residents' health, about the furniture company that had cut corners to increase profits. But she also thought about Walter, who had become her unexpected champion, about Dr. Wilson, whose life was connected to Martha's through an act of medical stubbornness in a field hospital decades ago, about Nurse Sarah, who had advocated for her when she was too weak to advocate for herself. The Paris Fund still existed, untouched thanks to the CDC's intervention. The dream she and Robert had shared could still be realized, yet somehow it seemed less urgent now. Paris had been their shared aspiration, a promise of future joy deferred until retirement, until someday. Now Martha understood with newfound clarity that life rarely waits for someday. There were more immediate promises to keep, to herself, to others who might be suffering as she had been, to the principles that had guided her nursing career for 45 years. The truth needed to be told, accountability demanded, systems changed. As Martha turned from the window to return to her bed, she caught sight of her reflection in the darkened television screen, still thin, still bearing the marks of her ordeal, but standing straight, eyes clear and determined. "Well, Robert," she whispered to the empty room, "it seems I'm not quite finished yet. Paris will have to wait a little longer." The morning Martha was scheduled to be discharged from the hospital, a sleek black town car idled at the entrance. Beside it stood a woman in an impeccable charcoal suit, tablet in hand, hair pulled back in a severe bun. She introduced herself as Cassandra Whitfield, senior legal counsel for Bradford Luxury Furnishings. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, extending a manicured hand, "I was hoping we might have a few minutes to discuss your unfortunate experience with our product." Martha, leaning on Walter's arm as they exited through the automatic doors, regarded the lawyer coolly. "Ms. Whitfield, I'm just leaving the hospital after nearly dying from parasites that your company's furniture introduced into my home. This hardly seems the appropriate time or place." Cassandra's professional smile didn't waver. "Of course, and please accept our sincere regrets regarding your experience. We'd like to make things right. Perhaps I could stop by your residence later this week." "We're prepared to offer a very generous compensation package." Walter bristled beside Martha. "You mean hush money?" he said bluntly. The lawyer's smile tightened. "We prefer to think of it as making amends, Mr. Nichols," he supplied. "Walter Nichols, neighbor and witness to everything Mrs. Sullivan has endured because your company lied about where their products were made." Martha placed a calming hand on Walter's arm. "Miss Whitfield, I'll consider speaking with you, but not today. I'm going home to rest and recover. You can contact me next week." The lawyer nodded, handing Martha a business card. "We truly do want to make this right, Mrs. Sullivan. Bradford Luxury Furnishings has been in business for over 40 years with an excellent safety record. This situation is unprecedented." "Unprecedented but preventable," Martha replied. "Good day, Ms. Whitfield." In the taxi ride back to Evergreen, Walter fumed. The nerve of them. Ambushing you outside the hospital. I'd bet good money they were watching for your discharge. Martha tucked the business card into her purse. Of course they were. They're worried about their reputation, their stock prices, their legal liability. It's business. It's despicable, Walter countered. Martha smiled faintly. Yes, that too. Evergreen Senior Living looked exactly as she had left it. The manicured grounds, the tasteful brick facade, the discreet sign announcing independent living for active seniors. Yet Martha viewed it differently now, seeing beyond the polished surface to the corporate entity beneath, one that prioritized profits and reputation over residents' well-being. Several neighbors spotted them arriving and approached with concerned inquiries about her health. Their interest seemed genuine, but Martha detected an undercurrent of morbid curiosity in some of their questions. Word had indeed spread about her condition and its unusual cause. Yes, I'm much better, thank you, she repeated patiently. Just tired and looking forward to being home. Her apartment had been meticulously cleaned. The CDC team had removed not only the infested armchair but also her sofa and several accent pillows as a precaution. The spaces where furniture had been looked starkly empty, emphasizing how little she actually owned. A note on the kitchen counter informed her that all soft furnishings had been steam cleaned and all surfaces disinfected with hospital-grade cleaners. It smells like a swimming pool in here, Walter observed, wrinkling his nose at the lingering scent of chlorine. Better than the alternative, Martha replied, moving slowly through the rooms, reacquainting herself with her home after nearly 2 weeks away. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like the Eiffel Tower, a gift from a patient who had actually made it to Paris, was another note, this one handwritten. Liberty is doing fine, but misses you. Call me when you're settled, and I'll bring her home. Gladys Hendricks, Apt. 312. Martha felt a rush of gratitude for her neighbor's kindness, a welcome counterbalance to the corporate callousness she had encountered. You should rest, Walter insisted, guiding her toward the bedroom. Doctor's orders. I'll unpack your things and make us some tea. Martha didn't protest. Despite her improvement, exhaustion still claimed her quickly, the legacy of her body's prolonged battle against the parasitic invaders. She sank onto her bed, touching the familiar quilt that Robert's mother had made for their wedding, breathing in the scent of home beneath the chemical overlay. She must have dozed off because when she opened her eyes, Walter was gently shaking her shoulder. Martha, you have visitors. Blinking away sleep, Martha was startled to find Gladys Hendricks in her doorway, Liberty's carrier in one hand and a casserole dish in the other. Behind her stood 3 more Evergreen residents. Harold, from the apartment below, Rose from the garden committee, and Bernard, who ran the community chess club. We thought you might like some company, Gladys explained, setting down the cat carrier. Liberty emerged cautiously, sniffing the air before recognizing Martha and leaping onto the bed with unusual agility for her age. And some food, Rose added, indicating the covered dishes they had brought. Hospital food is dreadful, and you need your strength. Martha was touched by their thoughtfulness. Thank you all. This is very kind. It's the least we could do, Bernard said, his voice gruff with emotion. After what you've been through, what all of us might have gone through if you hadn't identified the cause. As they settled in her living room, Walter bringing chairs from the kitchen to replace the missing furniture, Martha realized this was the first time in years she had entertained a group in her home. After Robert's death, she had withdrawn socially, and after Michael's accident, she had retreated further. When had she become so isolated? The conversation flowed easily, her neighbors sharing community news she had missed during her hospitalization. Liberty settled on her lap, purring contentedly as though nothing had changed. For a brief time, Martha felt normal again, the horror of the past weeks receding like a tide. Then Harold cleared his throat awkwardly. "Martha, we actually came for another reason too. We've been talking with some of the other residents. 3 more people have developed rashes similar to what you described. Diane from management is trying to keep it quiet, but—" Martha sat straighter, the nurse in her immediately alert. "Have they seen doctors? Been tested?" "One has," Rose confirmed. Dr. Reynolds told him it was just an allergic reaction to a new laundry detergent the facility started using. Martha felt a surge of anger. "The same, doctor." "Reynolds, who dismissed my symptoms as bedbug bites?" Bernard nodded grimly. "The very same. And Diane is insisting there's no connection to your case since the CDC removed the source from your apartment." Martha exchanged glances with Walter, whose expression mirrored her concern. "But if 3 more residents are showing symptoms, there could be another source," Walter finished. "Another piece of furniture from the same manufacturer." "Or something else entirely," Martha cautioned, her medical training preventing her from jumping to conclusions. "But it needs to be investigated properly, not brushed aside." "That's why we came to you," Gladys explained. "You're the only one they've listened to. The CDC, the doctors at St. Vincent's, they took your case seriously." "Eventually," Martha corrected, "after weeks of suffering and being dismissed." "But they did listen," Harold insisted. "And now you have their attention. We were hoping, that is, we wondered if you might help advocate for the others who are showing symptoms." Martha felt torn. Her body was still healing, her energy limited. The thought of battling the medical establishment and evergreen management again was exhausting. Yet how could she refuse when others might be suffering as she had? "I'll help," she said finally. "But I'll need information, names, symptoms, when they started, what furniture they've purchased recently." Her neighbors visibly relaxed, clearly having worried she might refuse. They had brought notes. Bernard produced a small notebook with meticulously recorded details about the affected residents. As Martha reviewed the information, a pattern emerged. All 3 residents with symptoms had attended the same furniture showcase in the Evergreen Community Room 2 months earlier, a special event where Bradford Luxury Furnishings had offered exclusive discounts to residents. "I missed that event," Martha murmured. "I bought my chair online after seeing it in their catalog." "I remember that showcase," Walter said, frowning. "They set up the community room like a showroom. Sofas, chairs, ottomans. Diane was very enthusiastic about it, encouraging everyone to upgrade their living spaces." Martha's mind raced. If multiple pieces of furniture from the same manufacturer had been introduced to Evergreen simultaneously, the potential for widespread infestation was alarming. "We need to contact Dr. Chambers and the CDC team immediately," she decided, "and in the meantime, the affected residents should document their symptoms carefully. Photographs, journals, everything." As her neighbors departed with their assignments, Harold to help the affected residents document their symptoms, Rose to discreetly inquire about other purchases from the showcase, Bernard to compile a complete list of attendees, Martha felt a familiar sense of purpose returning. This was what she had done for decades. Identified problems, organized responses, advocated for patients. "You should be resting," Walter reminded her gently after they had gone. "You're still recovering." Martha stroked Liberty, who had remained firmly on her lap throughout the impromptu meeting. "I'll rest better, knowing I'm doing something to help. These people could be in serious danger, Walter." That evening, as Martha prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The angry red welts had faded to dull pink. The areas where biopsies had been taken now covered with small bandages. She looked thinner, older, but there was a spark in her eyes that had been missing for years, the spark of engagement, of purpose. She thought of Diane Cooper from Evergreen Management, of Dr. Reynolds, who had dismissed her concerns, of Cassandra Whitfield from Bradford Luxury Furnishings with her generous compensation package, all of them hoping she would quietly accept what had happened and fade back into invisibility. Not this time, Martha told her reflection. Not ever again. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. Dr. James Reynolds stood awkwardly at her door, medical bag in hand, his usual confident demeanor notably absent. "Mrs. Sullivan," he began, not quite meeting her eyes. "The hospital asked me to check on you as part of your follow-up care." Martha regarded him coolly. "Did they specifically request you, Dr. Reynolds? Or did you volunteer?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I felt it was appropriate, given that I was involved in your initial diagnosis." "You mean your misdiagnosis," Martha corrected, "when you dismissed my concerns as simple bedbug bites without proper examination." A flush crept up his neck. "Yes, well, that's partly why I'm here. I wanted to, that is, I feel I owe you an apology." Martha stepped back, allowing him to enter. She hadn't expected an apology, and curiosity overrode her lingering resentment. Dr. Reynolds set his bag down and turned to face her squarely. "Mrs. Sullivan, I made a serious error in your case. I failed to conduct a thorough examination, failed to listen to your concerns, and as a result, delayed proper treatment for a dangerous condition." The words seemed rehearsed, but sincere. Martha remained silent, waiting. "The truth is," he continued, his professional facade cracking slightly, "I see dozens of elderly patients every day, many with complaints that are, well, not always medically significant. I developed a habit of triaging quickly, sometimes too quickly. Because elderly patients, particularly women, are often dismissed as anxious or confused," Martha supplied. "I saw it happen for 45 years as a nurse, Dr. Reynolds. I just never expected to experience it firsthand." He nodded, looking genuinely chastened. "Your case has been educational. The hospital has implemented new protocols for dermatological complaints regardless of patient age or presentation." Martha felt a small satisfaction at this news. Her suffering had at least prompted some systemic change. "And what about the other Evergreen residents who are now showing similar symptoms? Will they receive proper examinations? Or will they too be dismissed with prescriptions for steroid cream and advice to change their laundry detergent?" Dr. Reynolds looked startled. "Other residents with similar symptoms?" "3 so far," Martha confirmed, "all of whom attended a furniture showcase by Bradford Luxury Furnishings 2 months ago." The doctor's professional interest visibly overrode his discomfort. "Have they been examined? Tested?" "One was, by you, actually." "Harold Winters, from apartment 114. You told him it was an allergic reaction to new laundry detergent." Dr. Reynolds frowned, searching his memory. "Mr. Winters? Yes, I remember. Localized dermatitis on his forearms and neck, but it didn't resemble your presentation." "Neither did my initial symptoms," Martha pointed out. "The parasites take time to establish and spread." The doctor's expression shifted from defensive to concerned. "I should examine these patients properly, today if possible." Martha nodded approvingly. Perhaps he was capable of learning after all. "I'll let them know you're available. And Dr. Reynolds, this time please listen to what they tell you about their symptoms. They know their own bodies." After the doctor left, having conducted a thorough examination of her healing lesions and pronounced her recovery remarkable, Martha called Harold to relay the doctor's offer. Then she turned her attention to a more personal matter. From her bedroom dresser, she withdrew the envelope marked "Robert's Promise," counting the carefully saved bills inside. The Paris fund remained intact, $12,347 in cash, accumulated over decades of small sacrifices. Enough for the trip they had planned together, now a journey she would make alone. Or would she? Martha considered Walter, who had become such an unexpected presence in her life. Not a replacement for Robert. No one could ever be that. But a companion, a friend when she most needed one. Perhaps. Her thoughts were interrupted by the telephone. Dr. Chambers was calling with disturbing news. Mrs. Sullivan, we've identified 3 more cases in the greater Hartford area, all linked to furniture from Bradford Luxury Furnishings. None as advanced as yours, thankfully. But the pattern is clear. His voice was grave. The CDC is expanding its investigation, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission is considering a nationwide recall of all the company's products manufactured in the past year. Martha shared the information about the additional Evergreen residents showing symptoms. Dr. Chambers promised to dispatch a team immediately. "There's something else you should know," he added. "A reporter from the Hartford Courier has been asking questions about your case specifically. They seem to have learned that you're a former nurse who identified the source of the infestation when doctors missed it. They're framing it as a story about ageism in healthcare and corporate negligence." Martha sighed. The media attention she had been dreading seemed inevitable now. "What do you advise?" "That's entirely your decision, Mrs. Sullivan. You're under no obligation to speak publicly." "However," he hesitated, "your story is compelling and could help raise awareness about both issues, the potential dangers of fraudulently labeled imported furniture and the problem of elderly patients being dismissed by healthcare providers." After the call ended, Martha sat by her window, stroking Liberty and contemplating her options. Privacy had always been important to her. The thought of becoming a public figure, of having her medical ordeal dissected in newspapers, was deeply uncomfortable. Yet she thought of the other affected residents, of how many more might be suffering silently across the country. She thought of elderly patients being patted on the hand and sent home with dismissive diagnoses, their concerns unheard, their suffering prolonged unnecessarily. The telephone rang again. This time it was Cassandra Whitfield from Bradford Luxury Furnishings, her voice smooth as silk. "Mrs. Sullivan, I hope you're recovering well. I'm calling to follow up on our brief conversation at the hospital. Bradford is very eager to resolve this matter quickly and amicably." "By which you mean quietly," Martha observed. A slight pause. "We value our customers' privacy as much as our reputation for quality. Our CEO has authorized me to offer you a settlement of $250,000, contingent upon a standard confidentiality agreement." The figure took Martha's breath away. It was nearly 20 times her Paris fund, enough to secure her financial future entirely. No more counting pills, no more budget shopping, no more worrying about emergency expenses. "That's a very generous offer," she said carefully. "We believe it reflects both our regret regarding your experience and the value we place on resolving this matter expeditiously," Cassandra replied smoothly. Of course, the agreement would preclude any discussion of the incident with media or participation in any legal actions against Bradford. And there it was, the real purpose of the offer. Silence. Martha thought of the other victims, of the cases yet to be discovered, of the systemic failures that had allowed this to happen. "I appreciate your offer, Ms. Whitfield, but I'll need time to consider it and consult with legal counsel." Cassandra's tone cooled noticeably. "Of course. However, I should mention that this offer is time-sensitive. Given the developing situation, our board has authorized this amount for the next 48 hours only." A deadline, designed to pressure her into accepting quickly before she could fully consider the implications or consult an attorney. Martha had seen similar tactics used against vulnerable patients throughout her career. "Then I'll need to give you my answer in 48 hours, she replied evenly. "Good day, Mrs. Whitfield." As she hung up the phone, Martha felt a curious sense of calm. $250,000, a life-changing sum for a woman of modest means. The practical part of her recognized the value of such financial security at her age. The nurse in her recognized the good she could do with such resources, helping other victims, perhaps establishing a patient advocacy fund. But accepting would mean silence. It would mean allowing Bradford Luxury Furnishings to continue operating with minimal consequences, to potentially harm others, to avoid the full measure of accountability for their negligence. It would mean betraying everything she had stood for throughout her nursing career: truth, transparency, patient advocacy, systemic change. Martha moved to her desk and withdrew a sheet of stationery, the good kind she saved for important correspondence. In careful handwriting, she composed 2 lists: reasons to accept and reasons to decline. Under reasons to accept, she wrote, financial security for remaining years, no legal battles to endure while recovering. Privacy, maintained immediate resolution, could use money to help others privately. Under reasons to decline, she wrote, cannot speak publicly about dangers, cannot warn other potential victims, cannot participate in class action lawsuits. Company avoids full accountability. Systemic problems remain unaddressed. Other victims may feel pressured to accept similar offers. When Walter arrived that evening with dinner, a homemade chicken casserole that reminded Martha of Robert's mother's cooking, she showed him the lists and explained Cassandra's offer. Walter let out a low whistle. That's life-changing money, Martha. Yes, she agreed. That's what makes the decision so difficult. He studied her lists thoughtfully. You know, most people wouldn't hesitate. They'd take the money and consider themselves fortunate. I'm not most people, Martha replied simply. Walter smiled, adjusting his bow tie, burgundy today with tiny gold horseshoes. No, you certainly are not. He handed the paper back to her. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But for what it's worth, I think you already know what you're going to do. You just needed to see it written down. Martha looked at her lists again. He was right. The decision had been made in her heart long before she put pen to paper. The nurse who had fought for a young Marine's leg in Vietnam, who had advocated for countless patients over decades of service, who had persisted when doctors dismissed her own symptoms, that Martha Sullivan could make only one choice. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in the envelope with the Paris Fund. Whatever happened next, she wanted to remember this moment. The clarity of purpose, the certainty that some principles outweighed any price tag. Well, Robert, she whispered after Walter had gone home for the night, Liberty purring beside her on the bed, it seems Paris will have to wait a little longer. We have work to do first. The Hartford Courier offices occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated textile mill in the city's revitalized North End. Martha sat straight-backed in the reception area, her handbag precisely positioned on her lap, watching reporters hurry past with coffee cups and notepads. Walter sat beside her, his bow tie, navy blue with silver stars today, freshly straightened. "You're sure about this?" he asked for perhaps the 5th time since they had left Evergreen that morning. Martha nodded, her resolve unwavering. Completely sure. 48 hours had passed since Cassandra Whitfield's offer. Martha had called the attorney's office precisely at the deadline, her response simple and direct. I'm declining your offer. I believe the public deserves to know the truth. The silence that followed had been telling. Then Cassandra's voice, all professional warmth, evaporated. That's disappointing, Mrs. Sullivan. I should inform you that Bradford intends to vigorously defend its reputation against any potentially defamatory statements. The truth isn't defamatory, Ms. Whitfield, Martha had replied calmly, as I'm sure your legal team is aware. Now, 3 days later, she was about to make her decision public by speaking with Elena Morgan, an investigative reporter known for her exposés on corporate malfeasance and healthcare failures. It had been Elena who tracked Martha down, leaving messages with Evergreen's front desk and finally sending a handwritten note that piqued Martha's interest with its directness. Mrs. Sullivan, your story could save lives. Please consider sharing it. Mrs. Sullivan? A young woman with curly hair and intelligent eyes approached, hand extended. I'm Elena Morgan. Thank you so much for coming in. Martha rose to shake her hand. This is my neighbor, Walter Nichols. He's been involved since the beginning and has my permission to contribute to the conversation. Elena led them through the newsroom to a small conference room with windows overlooking the city. A photographer was setting up equipment in one corner, adjusting lights and checking his camera. I hope you don't mind if we take a few photographs, Elena said. It helps readers connect with the story. Martha had anticipated this, dressing carefully in a blue blouse that Robert had always said matched her eyes, her silver hair freshly styled. That's fine as long as they're dignified. I'm not interested in being portrayed as a helpless victim. Elena smiled approvingly. Absolutely not. Based on what I've learned about you so far, helpless is the last word I'd use. She opened a notebook. Before we begin formally, I want to be transparent about my approach. This story has several dimensions: your personal medical ordeal, the corporate negligence aspect, and the broader issues of ageism in healthcare and consumer protection failures. I intend to address all of these, but I'll follow your lead on how much personal detail to include. Martha appreciated the reporter's professionalism. I understand that my medical details are necessary to explain the situation. I'm prepared to be candid, within reason. The interview began with Martha's initial symptoms and her frustrating encounters with the medical establishment. Elena took copious notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing Martha to tell her story uninterrupted. Walter contributed details about his observations and involvement, his indignation still evident when describing how Martha had been dismissed by doctors and Evergreen management. So to be clear, Elena said, Dr. Reynolds examined you for less than 7 minutes before diagnosing bedbug bites, despite your professional background and specific concerns? That's correct, Martha confirmed. And the on-call physician who saw me later was equally dismissive. It wasn't until Dr. Wilson performed a proper examination that the parasitic infestation was identified. And this was after weeks of suffering? Nearly 6 weeks from the first symptoms to proper diagnosis. Elena shook her head, genuine dismay crossing her features. What do you believe would have happened if you hadn't been a nurse with the knowledge to advocate for yourself? Martha considered the question carefully. I believe the infestation would have continued spreading, potentially reaching vital organs. Given the inflammatory response my body was mounting, sepsis was a very real possibility. It could have been fatal. The photographer moved quietly around the room, capturing Martha's dignified profile, her hands gesturing as she spoke, Walter's supportive presence beside her. None of the posed, pitiful shots she had feared. These were images of strength, of righteous determination. Let's talk about Bradford Luxury Furnishings, Elena continued. You purchased what you believed was an American-made armchair, correct? Yes. It was marketed as part of their American Heritage collection. The website and catalog specifically highlighted Made in America as a selling point. And what did the CDC investigation reveal about the actual origin? Martha explained the complex supply chain that Bradford had obscured. Components sourced internationally, assembled in Mexico, with only final touches added in North Carolina to qualify for the Made in America label. And you've been contacted by their legal team? Elena prompted. Martha had decided in advance to be transparent about this as well. Yes, They offered a settlement of $250,000 contingent upon my signing a confidentiality agreement that would prevent me from speaking publicly or participating in any legal actions against the company. Elena's eyebrows shot up. That's a substantial offer. May I ask why you declined? Because the public deserves to know the truth, Martha said simply. Because other victims deserve the opportunity to seek justice. Because companies should be held accountable when their negligence causes harm. Walter nodded emphatically beside her. They thought they could buy her silence. They don't know Martha Sullivan very well. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, covering the CDC investigation, the other affected residents at Evergreen, and the broader implications for both the furniture industry and healthcare practices. Throughout, Martha remained articulate and composed, drawing on her decades of nursing experience to explain medical concepts clearly without talking down to her audience. As they concluded, Elena closed her notebook with evident satisfaction. Mrs. Sullivan, I believe your story will resonate deeply with our readers. It touches on issues that affect many Americans, particularly seniors: corporate deception, healthcare dismissiveness, the struggle to be heard and taken seriously. When do you anticipate publishing? Martha asked. I'll need a few days to complete additional research. I'm reaching out to Bradford for comment, speaking with consumer protection experts, and confirming details with the CDC. Realistically, we're looking at next Sunday's edition for the main feature, with possible follow-up pieces depending on the response. As they prepared to leave, Elena asked one final question. Mrs. Sullivan, is there anything else you'd like readers to know? Something we haven't covered yet? Martha paused, considering. Yes. I'd like them to know that I'm not doing this out of vengeance or for personal gain. I'm doing it because throughout my nursing career I saw too many patients suffer unnecessarily because systems failed them. Healthcare systems, regulatory systems, corporate systems. At 70, I never expected to become an advocate again. But if my experience can help improve these systems even slightly, then some meaning will have come from my suffering. Outside the newspaper offices, Walter hailed a taxi, noticing Martha's fatigue despite her composed exterior. You were magnificent, he told her as they settled into the back seat. Robert would be proud. The mention of her husband brought an unexpected lump to Martha's throat. I think he would be, she agreed softly. He never could abide injustice. Back at Evergreen, they found the community in subtle turmoil. The CDC team had returned, setting up in the community room to interview residents who had attended the furniture showcase. Diane Cooper from management hovered anxiously at the edges, her perfect coiffure slightly disheveled, her smile strained as she assured passing residents that this is just a precautionary measure. Martha and Walter paused in the doorway, observing the scene. Several residents spotted them and nodded respectfully, a few even offering thumbs-up gestures or approving smiles. Word had spread about Martha's stand against Bradford, her refusal of their settlement offer. Mrs. Sullivan! Dr. Chambers spotted her from across the room and approached, hand extended. I was hoping to see you. We've identified 5 more cases here at Evergreen, all in early stages. Thanks to your warning, we're able to intervene before the infestations become severe. Martha felt a complex mixture of vindication and concern. 5 more? All from furniture purchased at the showcase? 4 from the showcase? 1 from an online purchase like yours. All Bradford luxury furnishings products. He lowered his voice. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has issued an emergency recall of all Bradford products manufactured in the past 18 months. It will be announced publicly tomorrow. As they spoke, Martha noticed Diane Cooper watching them intently from across the room, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met, the manager quickly looked away, busying herself with paperwork. I should rest, Martha told Walter after Dr. Chambers had been called away to consult on another case. It's been a long day. Of course. He walked her to her apartment, hovering protectively as she unlocked the door. I'll check on you this evening. Perhaps bring some dinner? Martha smiled gratefully. That would be lovely. Thank you, Walter. Inside her apartment, Martha found Liberty waiting expectantly by her empty food bowl. The routine of caring for her pet, measuring kibble, refreshing water, provided a welcome return to normalcy after the emotional intensity of the interview. As she settled into her armchair, a basic replacement provided by Evergreen until her insurance claim was processed, Martha reflected on the path that had led her here, from dismissed patient to public advocate in just a few weeks' time. Life's strange turns never ceased to surprise her. The telephone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Dr. Wilson calling to check on her recovery and share some news. The hospital board has established a new protocol for elderly patients reporting unusual symptoms, she explained, her voice warm with satisfaction. It's being called the Sullivan Protocol informally, a requirement for more thorough examination and follow-up, particularly when patients have medical knowledge or specific concerns about their symptoms. Martha felt a surge of unexpected emotion. That's quite an honor. It's well-deserved, Dr. Wilson assured her. Your case has become something of a watershed moment for us. Several physicians have approached me privately to acknowledge that they've been guilty of similar dismissiveness with elderly patients. Your experience is changing perspectives. After they hung up, Martha sat quietly, absorbing this news. The Sullivan Protocol, a small but meaningful legacy that might spare others the suffering she had endured. Robert would indeed be proud. That evening, Walter arrived with dinner and news of his own. The CDC team asked me about my observations of your symptoms and the chair, he explained as they ate at Martha's small dining table. They were particularly interested in my background knowledge of furniture manufacturing. Martha looked up in surprise. Background knowledge? You never mentioned having expertise in furniture. Walter adjusted his bow tie, uncharacteristically hesitant. Well, it never seemed relevant until now. Before I retired, I was in the furniture import business for nearly 30 years. Quality control was part of my responsibility. Martha set down her fork, staring at him. You worked in furniture imports? All this time, you've been helping me deal with a furniture-related crisis, and you never thought to mention this? Walter's weathered cheeks flushed slightly. At first, I didn't make the connection. By the time I suspected the chair might be the source, we were focused on getting you proper medical care. He met her gaze directly. And then, well, I wasn't sure how to bring it up without sounding implicated somehow. Implicated? Martha repeated, bewildered. Walter, did you work for Bradford? No, he assured her quickly. I worked for Curtis Sons, one of their competitors, but we used many of the same overseas suppliers, the same assembly facilities in Mexico. He hesitated. The practices Bradford employed, sourcing components internationally while claiming American manufacturing, were industry-wide. I was part of that system, Martha. Understanding dawned. Walter's exceptional knowledge of the furniture industry, his immediate suspicion of the chair, his passionate advocacy on her behalf, all took on new meaning. You felt guilty, she realized, not because you were responsible for what happened to me specifically, but because you were part of the industry that made it possible. Walter nodded, unable to meet her eyes. I retired 5 years ago before this particular hybrid parasitic species emerged. But the conditions that allowed it to happen, the poor quality control in certain facilities, the deliberate obscuring of supply chains, those were practices I witnessed and, to my shame, sometimes facilitated. Martha reached across the table to take his hand. Walter, you've been my strongest advocate through this entire ordeal. Whatever your past involvement with the industry, you've more than made up for it with your actions now." He squeezed her hand gratefully. "I've been terrified of losing your good opinion. When the CDC investigator asked about my background, I realized I couldn't keep it from you any longer." "Does the CDC think your knowledge could be valuable to their investigation?" Walter nodded. "They've asked me to consult, to help identify other potential manufacturers who might be using the same problematic supply chains. I've agreed, of course." Martha smiled. "Then something good is coming from your past experience. That's all any of us can hope for, that our mistakes eventually lead to something positive." The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity. The Consumer Product Safety Commission's recall announcement triggered nationwide coverage of the parasitic furniture scandal. Martha's phone rang constantly with calls from other news outlets seeking interviews, from attorneys representing furniture buyers in other states, from furniture industry representatives wanting to clarify certain points. She declined most requests, referring reporters to the CDC and attorneys to the class action lawsuit that was rapidly forming. Her story would be told through Elena Morgan's article, thoroughly, accurately, with dignity intact. Walter, meanwhile, found himself unexpectedly busy as a consultant to both the CDC and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, his insider knowledge of furniture industry practices proving invaluable to the expanding investigation. Each evening, he would join Martha for dinner, sharing the day's developments and marveling at how their quiet retirement had been so thoroughly disrupted. "I never imagined being useful again," he confessed one night as they shared a pot of tea. "After Elaine died, after I retired, I thought that part of my life was over." Martha understood completely. She had felt the same after Robert's death, after her nursing career ended, that her days of meaningful contribution had concluded. How wrong they both had been. On Saturday evening, the day before Elena's article was scheduled to appear in the Sunday edition of the Hartford Courier, Martha received an unexpected visitor. Cassandra Whitfield stood at her door, impeccably dressed as always, but with a subtle tension around her eyes that hadn't been present before. "Mrs. Sullivan," she began formally, "I apologize for coming unannounced, but I felt we should speak before tomorrow's publication." Martha considered refusing her entry, but decided against it. Better to hear whatever the lawyer had to say. "Come in, Ms. Whitfield. Would you like some tea?" Cassandra declined the offer, perching uncomfortably on the edge of Martha's replacement sofa. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'll be direct. Bradford Luxury Furnishings is prepared to increase our settlement offer to $1 million. Martha's breath caught. $1 million. A sum so far beyond her modest expectations of life that it seemed almost abstract. No more financial worries, ever. The Paris Fund multiplied 80 times over. Security not just for herself, but potentially for causes she cared about, for patient advocacy, for whatever legacy she might wish to leave. The same confidentiality terms would apply, of course, Cassandra continued, watching Martha's face carefully. The agreement would need to be signed tonight before the Courier goes to press. Martha took a moment to steady herself. You must be very concerned about what that article will reveal to increase your offer so dramatically. A flicker of something. Frustration? Respect? Crossed Cassandra's features. Bradford values its reputation. The recall has already caused significant damage. We prefer to resolve individual claims privately. Even at a cost of $1 million? The board considers it an investment in the company's future. Martha nodded slowly. I see. And the other victims? The ones who haven't been identified yet, or who lack the resources to fight for proper compensation? Cassandra's professional mask slipped slightly. Mrs. Sullivan, my job is to represent Bradford's interests, not to address hypothetical victims. We're making this offer to you specifically in recognition of your unique situation. You mean in recognition of my ability to articulate what happened to me, Martha corrected. In recognition of my medical background, my persistence, and the credibility those factors give me with the media and potential jurors. The lawyer didn't deny it. $1 million is a life-changing sum, Mrs. Sullivan. You could do a great deal of good with such resources while sparing yourself the stress and public exposure of what's to come. Martha rose from her chair, signaling the conversation's end. Miss Whitfield, my answer remains no. Not for $250,000, not for $1 million, not for any amount. Some things aren't for sale. My integrity is one of them. Cassandra gathered her handbag, her expression unreadable. You're either the most principled person I've ever met, Mrs. Sullivan, or the most foolish. I'm not sure which. After the lawyer left, Martha sat alone in her quiet apartment, Liberty purring beside her, considering the choice she had just made. $1 million, refused without hesitation. Robert would have understood. He had always said that a clear conscience was worth more than any bank account. She thought of the other victims, those already identified and those yet to be discovered. She thought of the systemic failures that had allowed this situation to develop, the corporate practices that prioritized profit over safety, the medical dismissiveness that prolonged suffering. Her $1 million refusal was a stand against all of it. Some might call it foolish, Robert, she whispered to the empty room, but I think we both know it's the only choice I could live with. The next morning, Sunday's Hartford Courier landed with a thud outside her apartment door. The headline on the front page read, "Parasites in the Furniture: How Corporate Deception and Medical Dismissal Nearly Cost a Woman Her Life." Beneath it was a photograph of Martha, her expression dignified and determined, Walter beside her in quiet support. Elena Morgan's article was everything Martha had hoped for. Thorough, balanced, damning in its factual presentation without resorting to sensationalism. It detailed Martha's ordeal chronologically, highlighting the corporate negligence that had introduced dangerous parasites into American homes and the medical dismissiveness that had prolonged her suffering. Most powerfully, it connected Martha's experience to broader systemic issues. Sullivan's case exemplifies a troubling pattern in American health care, Elena wrote. Elderly patients, particularly women, routinely report having their medical concerns minimized or dismissed. A 2023 study from the National Institutes of Health found that patients over 65 are 37% less likely to receive thorough diagnostic testing when reporting ambiguous symptoms, with elderly women facing the highest rates of dismissal. The article concluded with Martha's own words. I was a nurse for 45 years. I advocated for thousands of patients. Now I find myself advocating again, not just for myself, but for everyone who has been silenced, dismissed, or deceived. Some systems only change when brave people stand up and say, "This is wrong and it must stop." At 70, I never expected to be that person again. But here I am. Walter arrived as Martha was finishing her second reading of the article, his bow tie, forest green with golden leaves today, perfectly matched to his excitement. It's tremendous, Martha. Elena did a masterful job. The phone's been ringing off the hook at my place. Reporters, former colleagues, even my son in California called after seeing it online. Martha smiled, genuinely pleased with the article's quality, but overwhelmed by the prospect of the attention it would bring. It is well done. I just hope it helps others who might be suffering silently. It already has, Walter assured her. The CDC hotline they established has received over 200 calls since yesterday, many citing your case specifically. People are checking their furniture, demanding proper medical examinations, asking questions they might have been too intimidated to ask before. As they sat discussing the article over coffee, Martha's phone began to ring. The first call was from Dr. Wilson, offering congratulations and reporting that the hospital had been inundated with appointment requests from elderly patients, citing the Sullivan Protocol. The second call was from Diane Cooper, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Mrs. Sullivan, we at Evergreen want you to know that we're implementing new response protocols for resident health concerns, and we'll be conducting thorough inspections of all furniture purchased through Evergreen-sponsored events." "That's very responsible of you, Diane," Martha replied neutrally. "I assume you'll be checking on the other affected residents personally?" A pause. "Yes, of course. And the board has approved funding for replacement furniture for anyone affected by the recall." Small victories, Martha thought as she hung up. Systemic changes happening in real time, prompted by one person's refusal to be silenced. The most surprising call came shortly before noon, Dr. Reynolds sounding both chastened and resolute. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've just read the Courier article. I want you to know that I've submitted a formal proposal to the medical board for enhanced training on geriatric symptom evaluation for all practitioners in our network." Martha was genuinely surprised. "That's commendable, Doctor." "Your case has been a powerful wake-up call," he continued. "Not just for me, but for many of my colleagues. We're trained to look for horses, not zebras, when we hear hoofbeats. But that doesn't excuse failing to look carefully at all." After the calls subsided, Walter suggested lunch at the small cafe in downtown Millfield. "A celebration of sorts," he proposed, "for standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." As they walked arm in arm through Evergreen's landscaped grounds toward Walter's car, Martha noticed other residents watching them, some nodding in acknowledgement, others approaching to offer quiet words of support or share their own stories of medical dismissal. "You've become quite the celebrity," Walter observed as they drove into town, the autumn leaves creating a canopy of gold and crimson above the street. Martha shook her head. "Not a celebrity. A symbol, perhaps, of what can happen when people refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice." At the cafe, they were surprised to find several tables occupied by Evergreen residents who had apparently had the same idea, a community lunch outing to show support for Martha. Harold, Rose, Bernard, and Gladys waved them over to a large corner table already set for 6. "We thought you might come here," Gladys explained, beaming. "Everyone's read the article. You're our hero, Martha." Martha felt herself blushing, unaccustomed to such attention. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Bernard said firmly. "You did what most people are afraid to do. You stood up to power, corporate power, medical power, institutional power. And you refused to be bought off even when the price was high." Walter leaned in conspirationally. "They don't know how high," he murmured for Martha's ears only. "1 million would impress them even more." Martha elbowed him gently. "That's not why I did it." "I know," he replied, his eyes warm with admiration. "That's what makes it extraordinary." As their impromptu celebration continued, Martha found herself relaxing into the moment, enjoying the camaraderie and sense of shared purpose. These people, neighbors who had been mere acquaintances weeks ago, had become something more, a community in the truest sense of the word, united by common experiences and mutual support. She thought of Robert, of how he would have loved this, the laughter, the sense of righteous victory, the breaking down of the isolation that had characterized their early years at Evergreen. He had always been more social than she, always encouraging her to let people in a little more, Marty. Perhaps after all these years she was finally taking his advice. Perhaps this, not Paris, was the promise that mattered most: to live fully, to stand firmly for what was right, to remain engaged with the world and its injustices, even when it would be easier to retreat into the quiet comfort of routine. As Martha raised her glass to join in a toast proposed by Harold to truth and consequences, she felt a sense of peace settling over her. Whatever came next, the media attention, the legal proceedings, the long process of systemic change, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her through decades of nursing, through loss and grief, through this recent ordeal. Some battles chose their warriors. This one had chosen her. 6 months had passed since the Hartford Courier published Elena Morgan's exposé. Spring had returned to Connecticut, bringing daffodils to Evergreen's meticulously maintained gardens and a sense of renewal that matched Martha's own journey. The physical scars from her ordeal had faded to faint, silvery marks, visible only if one knew where to look. The emotional impact, however, had transformed her in ways both subtle and profound. Martha stood at her apartment window, watching residents stroll along the winding paths below. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman changed from the one who had first noticed mysterious welts on her skin last fall. Still slender, still silver-haired, but standing straighter, eyes clearer, purpose restored. The months following the article's publication had been busier than any in her retirement. The story had been picked up by national news outlets, transforming Martha's personal ordeal into a rallying point for multiple causes: elder advocacy, consumer protection, corporate accountability, and healthcare reform. She had given carefully selected interviews, testified before a congressional subcommittee on consumer safety, and consulted with attorneys representing the class action lawsuit against Bradford Luxury Furnishings, which now included over 300 plaintiffs nationwide. "Are you ready?" Walter called from the living room, adjusting his bow tie, crimson with small golden keys today, chosen specifically for the occasion. "The car will be here in 15 minutes. "Almost," Martha replied, turning from the window to check her appearance one final time. She had chosen a tailored blue suit for today's courthouse appearance, where the judge would formally approve the settlement agreement between Bradford and the class action plaintiffs. Martha's role as lead plaintiff had placed her at the center of negotiations, her steadfast refusal to accept silencing payments becoming a cornerstone of the case. Liberty watched from the bed as Martha gathered her handbag and the folder containing her prepared statement for the press conference that would follow the hearing. The elderly cat had weathered the chaos of the past months with typical feline indifference, her only concession to the changes being a newfound tolerance for Walter's presence in their apartment. "You look magnificent," Walter said when Martha emerged from the bedroom. "Very judicial." She smiled at the compliment. Their relationship had evolved during these months of shared purpose. Not romantic exactly, but deeply connected, a partnership of equals facing challenges together. Walter had become indispensable, using his industry knowledge to assist investigators and attorneys while shielding Martha from the worst of the media intrusion and legal complexities. "The settlement still feels inadequate," Martha confessed as they waited for their car. "No amount of money can truly compensate for what some of these people suffered." Walter nodded, understanding. "But the regulatory changes, those will make a real difference going forward." He was right, of course. Beyond the financial compensation, which would provide affected consumers with payments ranging from $25,000 to $175,000 depending on the severity of their injuries, the settlement included stringent new requirements for furniture labeling, supply chain transparency, and quality control testing. Bradford had also agreed to fund an independent research initiative on parasitic threats in imported goods, a provision Martha had personally insisted upon during negotiations. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when their car arrived. Martha had become accustomed to cameras over the past months, but still found the attention disconcerting. Among the press gathered, she spotted Elena Morgan, who waved discreetly. The reporter's original article had earned her a prestigious journalism award and launched a series of investigations into corporate accountability that continued to generate headlines. Inside the courtroom, Martha was greeted warmly by the legal team and several fellow plaintiffs who had traveled to witness this culmination of their collective fight for justice. Harold from Evergreen was there, his once suspicious Rash now healed, but his determination to see the process through unchanged. Beside him sat a young mother from Massachusetts whose toddler had developed severe reactions to a Bradford crib mattress, and an elderly man from Florida who had spent weeks hospitalized after purchasing a contaminated recliner. They were just a few representatives of the hundreds affected, their stories woven together by common threads of corporate negligence and institutional failure. Martha had come to know many of them personally, their shared experiences creating bonds that transcended geography and circumstance. Judge Eleanor Harmon entered the courtroom precisely at 10 o'clock, her reputation for punctuality and no-nonsense efficiency preceding her. The proceedings moved swiftly through the formal approval of the settlement terms, the judge occasionally asking clarifying questions of the attorneys, but showing no inclination to alter the carefully negotiated agreement. "Before we conclude," Judge Harmon said as the final documents were presented for her signature, "I wish to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances that brought this case before the court." Her gaze settled on Martha. "Mrs. Sullivan, your courage in refusing private settlement offers and insisting on public accountability has set a powerful precedent. This court commends your commitment to consumer safety and corporate responsibility." Martha nodded respectfully, unexpectedly moved by the judge's recognition. When the gavel fell, signaling the official conclusion of the case, she felt a complex wave of emotions. Satisfaction that justice had been served, relief that the legal ordeal was ending, but also a curious sense of loss. This battle had given her renewed purpose. Its conclusion left an uncertain void. The press conference that followed was mercifully brief. Martha delivered her prepared statement, emphasizing the settlement's regulatory components rather than the financial awards. "The true measure of justice in this case is not the dollars paid to victims," she told the assembled reporters, "but the systemic changes that will protect future consumers. No one should have to endure what we experience simply because corporations prioritize profits over people." Questions followed, most directed to the lead attorney but several specifically for Martha. She answered with the same measured clarity that had characterized her nursing career, neither downplaying the suffering nor indulging in hyperbole. When asked if she felt vindicated by the outcome, Martha paused thoughtfully before responding. Vindication suggests that this was somehow personal. It wasn't. It was about accountability and change. If those have been achieved, then yes, I suppose that is a form of vindication, not just for me, but for everyone affected. As they left the courthouse, Walter protective at her side, Elena Morgan approached. "Mrs. Sullivan, do you have a moment?" Martha greeted the reporter warmly. Elena's continued coverage had been instrumental in maintaining public interest as the case wound through the legal system. "I wanted to let you know that we're publishing a follow-up piece tomorrow on the broader impacts of your case," Elena explained. "The Sullivan Protocol has now been adopted by 17 hospital systems nationwide. Medical schools in Boston and Chicago have developed new geriatric training modules specifically addressing the dismissal of elderly patients' concerns. And consumer advocacy groups are citing your case in lobbying for stricter import regulations." Martha absorbed this information with quiet satisfaction. These systemic changes, small ripples expanding outward from her individual experience, represented the true victory. "There's something else," Elena continued. "I've been approached by a publisher interested in a book about your case and its implications." They're particularly interested in the personal story behind the headlines, your nursing background, your persistence in the face of dismissal, the choice to advocate for others rather than accept private compensation. Martha shook her head immediately. I'm not interested in becoming more of a public figure than I already am. The story has been told adequately through your excellent reporting. Elena smiled, clearly having anticipated this response. I expected you might feel that way, but consider this. A book could reach people who don't read news articles about consumer protection or healthcare policy. It could help elderly readers recognize when they're being dismissed and give them tools to advocate for themselves. It could influence medical students and practitioners in ways that clinical studies cannot. Walter, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. She has a point, Martha. Personal stories change minds more effectively than statistics or policy papers. Martha remained unconvinced. I'll think about it, she conceded, though her tone suggested otherwise. Later that afternoon, back at Evergreen, Martha and Walter hosted a small gathering in the community room for residents who had followed the case. Diane Cooper had surprisingly approved the use of the space, even providing refreshments, a gesture that reflected the management company's dramatic shift in attitude since the scandal broke. Evergreen now proudly advertised its Resident Advocacy Program and Senior Health Concerns Task Force, institutional changes directly resulting from Martha's case. To Martha, Harold proposed, raising his glass of sparkling cider, who showed us all that age is no barrier to fighting for what's right. The assembled residents, many of whom had previously kept to themselves, isolated in their individual apartments, echoed the toast enthusiastically. Martha observed the gathering with quiet satisfaction, noting how the shared experience had transformed Evergreen from a collection of separate lives into something resembling a true community. Rose from the garden committee approached Martha, her typically reserved demeanor softened by genuine emotion. I never properly thanked you, she said quietly. My sister in Arizona had the same symptoms I did. The rash, the movement sensations. After reading about your case, she insisted on proper testing. They found the same parasites from the same brand of furniture. She's recovering now thanks to early intervention. Thanks to you. Such stories had become common in Martha's life. Chance encounters in grocery stores, letters from across the country, calls from strangers who had recognized their symptoms in news reports about her case. Each one reinforced the ripple effect of her decision to speak out, rather than accept private compensation. As the gathering wound down, Walter walked Martha back to her apartment, their pace leisurely in the mild spring evening. You know, he said thoughtfully, we never properly celebrated the conclusion of this case. The courthouse and press conference hardly qualify as festive. Martha smiled. What did you have in mind? Dinner at Millfield Cafe again? Walter shook his head. I was thinking of something more significant. You once mentioned a dream trip. Paris, wasn't it? The one you and Robert planned but never took? Martha stopped walking, surprised by the direction of the conversation. Yes, but hear me out, Walter continued, his expression earnest beneath bushy white eyebrows. I've never been to Paris either. Elaine and I always talked about European travel after retirement, but her illness changed those plans. He adjusted his bow tie nervously. I was thinking, perhaps we might go together. As friends, of course. Two old people fulfilling promises to those we've lost. Martha felt a complex surge of emotions, surprise at the suggestion, a pang of memory for Robert, and something unexpected. Excitement at the prospect of finally seeing the city they had dreamed of together. The settlement money will be distributed next month, Walter added. You'll have more than enough for the trip Robert planned, plus some. And he hesitated. Well, I've been saving for something meaningful too. Back in her apartment, after promising Walter she would consider his suggestion, Martha opened the bottom drawer of her dresser where the Paris fund still resided. Beside it now lay the faded photograph Dr. Wilson had shown her of a young Martha standing next to her father's hospital bed in Vietnam. The doctor had given it to her as a gift after the case concluded, a tangible reminder of lives connected across decades by acts of courage and care. Martha unfolded the travel brochure that had accompanied the Paris Fund for so many years, its once vibrant colors now faded, its promises of romantic strolls along the Seine and cafe breakfasts with views of the Eiffel Tower unchanged despite the passage of time. "What do you think, Robert?" she asked aloud, touching the worn paper gently. "Is it time?" Liberty jumped onto the bed beside her, purring as Martha stroked her aging fur. The cat had been Robert's final gift to her, a living reminder that life continues, that connections persist, that love transforms but never truly ends. Martha's gaze fell on the settlement paperwork she had brought home from the courthouse. The financial component was substantial, not the $1 million Bradford had offered for her silence, but enough to provide security for her remaining years and still fund several worthy causes. The Paris trip would barely dent the total, but the true value of the settlement lay in its non-monetary provisions. And the regulatory changes, the safety requirements, the transparency mandates, these would outlast her, creating a legacy of protection for countless consumers who would never know her name but would benefit from her refusal to be silenced. Her telephone rang, interrupting her reflections. It was Dr. Wilson calling to congratulate her on the settlement's approval. "I watched the press conference online," the doctor said. "You were magnificent, Mrs. Sullivan, clear, dignified, focused on the greater good rather than personal vindication." "Thank you," Martha replied, genuinely touched by the younger woman's continued support. "And please, after all we've been through, I think you can call me Martha." "Martha," Dr. Wilson amended warmly, "I wanted to let you know that the Sullivan Protocol is being featured at next month's American Medical Association conference. They've asked me to present a case study on how it's changed our approach to elderly patients, particularly those with unusual or complex symptoms." After they hung up, Martha returned to the Paris brochure, a decision crystallizing in her mind. The trip she and Robert had planned had been deferred too long, first by financial constraints, then by his illness, then by her own inertia after his death. Life offered no guarantees of someday. She had learned that lesson too many times to ignore it now. Walter's suggestion of traveling together made practical sense. Two seniors navigating a foreign country would be easier than one alone, but it represented something more significant. A step forward, an acknowledgement that life continued, that new connections could form without diminishing those lost to time. "I think it's time, Robert," she said softly, folding the brochure and returning it to the envelope with the Paris Fund. "Not to say goodbye to you, but to keep our promise at last." The next morning, Martha called Walter to accept his proposal. His delight was evident even through the telephone line. "I'll start researching flights immediately," he promised. "Spring in Paris is supposed to be magnificent." As Martha prepared for her regular checkup with Dr. Wilson later that day, the last of her follow-up appointments related to the parasitic infection, she felt lighter than she had in years. The burden of Robert's unfulfilled promise was lifting, transformed from a weight of regret into a journey of fulfillment. The hospital corridors were familiar now, no longer places of dismissal and frustration, but of vindication and progress. Nurses and staff greeted her by name, some stopping to express admiration for her advocacy work. In the dermatology department, a framed poster outlining the Sullivan Protocol held a prominent position at the nurses' station. Dr. Wilson's examination was thorough but quick, confirming what Martha already knew. Her recovery was complete. The physical evidence of her ordeal faded to nearly imperceptible marks. "You've healed remarkably well," Dr. Wilson confirmed, making final notes in Martha's chart. "I'm officially discharging you from follow-up care, though I hope you'll stay in touch." "Of course," Martha agreed. "And I have news that might interest you. I'm finally taking that trip to Paris, the one Robert and I planned for so many years." Dr. Wilson's face lit up. "Martha, that's wonderful. When do you leave?" "Next month, assuming the arrangements come together. Walter Nichols, my neighbor who's been so supportive through all this, suggested we travel together." Martha smiled slightly. "Two old people fulfilling promises to those we've lost," as he put it. Dr. Wilson's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, my father spoke often about promises. He said that the ones we make to those we love are sacred, but so are the ones we make to ourselves." She hesitated, then added, "He also said that the nurse who saved his leg in Vietnam, you, taught him that healing isn't just about the body. It's about keeping faith with yourself and others, even when it seems impossible." The words resonated deeply with Martha. Throughout her ordeal, from the first dismissive medical appointment to the final courthouse appearance, she had been keeping faith, with her nursing principles, with Robert's memory, with her own sense of justice and accountability. As she left the hospital for what might be the final time as a patient, Martha paused in the lobby, remembering the day Walter had brought her there in desperation. How Dr. Wilson had recognized her connection to a wounded Marine treated decades earlier in a field hospital half a world away. Life's strange circles, its unexpected connections, its persistent reminders that no act of courage or kindness exists in isolation. Outside, spring sunshine bathed the hospital grounds in golden light. Martha stood for a moment, face upturned to the warmth, aware of how close she had come to never feeling such simple pleasures again. The parasites that had invaded her body were gone, but they had left something unexpected in their wake. A renewed sense of purpose, of connection, of engagement with the world and its injustices. 3 weeks later, Martha stood at the gate in Bradley International Airport, passport and boarding pass in hand, Walter beside her with matching carry-on luggage, a gift from their evergreen neighbors who had organized a surprise bon voyage party the previous evening. Liberty was being cared for by Gladys Hendricks, who had promised daily updates and photos. "Nervous?" Walter asked, noticing Martha's pensive expression. "Not nervous," she replied truthfully, "just aware of the significance. This isn't just a vacation, it's the fulfillment of a promise nearly 50 years in the making." Walter nodded, understanding. "To Robert." "Yes," Martha agreed, "but also to myself, to the young nurse who believed life would always offer second chances, that postponed dreams weren't lost ones." As they boarded the plane that would carry them first to New York and then across the Atlantic to Paris, Martha felt Robert's presence not as a ghost, but as a foundation, the love and life they had shared forming the base upon which she continued to build. He would have approved of this journey, she knew, not because of the destination, but because it represented her continued engagement with life, her refusal to retreat into the shadows of age and loss. The flight attendant welcomed them aboard with professional courtesy, directing them to their seats. Another gift, this one from the attorney who had represented Martha in the class action suit, who had insisted on upgrading them to business class for all you've done for others. As the plane began its taxi toward the runway, Martha glanced at her seatmate. Walter's bow tie today featured tiny Eiffel Towers against a background of blue that matched the Paris sky in the travel brochures. His expression combined excitement and nervous anticipation, emotions Martha recognized in herself. "Ready for our adventure?" he asked. offering his hand as the engines roared and the aircraft began its acceleration. Martha placed her hand in his, feeling the paper-thin skin, the prominent veins, the slight tremor of age. A hand that had provided unwavering support through her darkest days, that had helped her stand when standing alone seemed impossible. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." As the plane lifted into the cloudless spring sky, Martha thought about the unlikely path that had led her here. How suffering had transformed into advocacy, how dismissal had fueled determination, how an infestation of parasites had ultimately led to an infusion of purpose. Life's most meaningful journeys rarely followed planned routes. Sometimes they began with pain, with struggle, with being forced to fight for acknowledgement and care. But their destinations, if one persisted, if one refused to be silenced or sidelined, could surpass even the most cherished dreams. Paris awaited, just as it had for nearly half a century. But Martha Sullivan was no longer merely fulfilling an old promise. She was making a new one. To herself, to Robert's memory, to the countless others whose lives she had touched through her refusal to accept injustice. A promise to remember that age was no barrier to courage, that past losses need not preclude future joys, that healing, true healing, meant not just recovery but renewal. As Connecticut fell away beneath them, Martha smiled. The journey had only just begun. Martha Sullivan's journey reminds us that our golden years can be our most powerful. At 70, she transformed from a dismissed patient into a fierce advocate who changed healthcare forever. How many of us have felt invisible in doctors' offices or feared being a burden to others? Martha shows us that our decades of wisdom make us stronger, not weaker. She refused a $1 million settlement because principles matter more than money, a lesson only experience can truly teach. Most beautifully, Martha finally embraced her Paris dream, proving it's never too late to fulfill promises, whether to lost loved ones or to ourselves. Her story isn't just about fighting parasites. It's about refusing to let age diminish our worth or silence our voices. The Sullivan Protocol now protects thousands of seniors because one woman stood her ground. What dreams have you postponed that deserve fulfillment now? What injustice have you witnessed that needs your unique voice? Life's most meaningful chapters may still be unwritten, waiting for you to find the courage to turn the page. Share your postponed dreams in the comments. What's your Paris that deserves to become reality?